Our hero, Yurin, jumped up in bed, cold sweat pouring down his face. Looking in the mirror, he realized that he had been reborn in someone else's body. A fat, pale face, the dregs of a noble family. His eyes widened in horror. The hero didn't even have time to process what he saw, when suddenly his father entered the room, glared at him angrily, and accused him of doing nothing but disgrace their family. He struck him with all his might, as if he were worthless trash, good for nothing. And at that moment, lying on the cold floor, it dawned on him, this wasn't just someone else's body. He had been reincarnated into a character in a manhwa he had written, but not the protagonist, but a lousy loser, who endlessly takes the hero's punishment, and in the end, dies uselessly. His new identity is Yurin Rocks, the Marquis' son, a complete disgrace, a complete scumbag who despises training, so worthless that even his own fiancée has merged with the protagonist. He lowered his head, wondering only one question, how could he possibly survive in this body? And then it dawned on him, he knew where all the protagonist's over-the-top clothes were hidden. He tried to get up, but the fat body treacherously pulled him down. Lying on the floor, the hero noticed a system window hanging above the maid's head. Lucas glanced at the mirror, and froze. An identical notification hung above him. He looked closely. At the very bottom, a line appeared, 4 heavenly venom arts. Then the hero froze. The Tang clan, those masters of poison blades, an ancient technique that allows them to coat weapons with poison and kill without a trace. It immediately clicked in his head, if he mastered this art, if the system was right, he would have a chance. With these thoughts in mind, he went to train. As Eren leads him across the enormous estate, Yurin is already exhausted by the sheer scale of the mansion grounds. He quickly admits that trying to work out alone in his room always ends with his own laziness and body dragging him back to bed. Concluding he needs a proper environment, he keeps following Eren while startled servants nervously greet him. That reaction makes him suspect every servant he meets carries some grudge against him. His status view confirms one maid merely dislikes him. Another servant's feelings are even worse, bordering on extreme hatred. Seeing multiple readings of dislike, extreme dislike, and outright hatred, Yurin accepts that the household despises him. Remembering how awful the original Yurin was, he admits the servants have every reason to feel that way. Still panting from the walk, he begs to know whether they have finally reached the training grounds. Eren tells him they are close and explains this is the 3rd training hall, since most knights use the 1st and 2nd. Before they can settle in, Eren notices someone else is already there. Yurin checks the man's status and is horrified to find murderous intent aimed directly at him. The man is Rekka Alian, a trainee knight with quick sword, and he greets Yurin with a smile that feels more threatening than respectful. Rekka asks why the young master has come to the training hall, clearly savoring the encounter. Yurin recognizes the name at once and blurts it out in alarm. Rekka takes pleasure in being remembered and treats the moment like a personal honor. Yurin forces a cheerful response while inwardly panicking. He hurriedly pulls Eren aside and asks what exactly happened between him and that man. As Rekka waits with sword in hand, Eren begins to explain the source of the hatred. When Eren asks whether he remembers, Yurin can only admit that he does not. Eren recounts that years ago, when the Marquis forced Yurin to train, the furious boy summoned Rekka for practice. Back then Yurin slashed Rekka's face while laughing, and the Marquis gave up trying to train him after that. The memory leaves Yurin stunned while Rekka's scarred silence says enough. Rekka's cold stare makes it clear the grudge never faded. Yurin can only conclude that his former self truly was irredeemable trash. Deciding survival matters more than pride, he immediately tries to retreat and drag Eren away. Instead of using this hall, he asks Eren for another place where he can train alone. Eren mentions a 4th hall that is far away, poorly equipped, and mostly just an empty field. That sounds ideal to Yurin, who eagerly chooses it and vows to lose weight properly. Though puzzled, Eren agrees and tells him to follow. After another exhausting trek, they finally arrive at the neglected 4th training hall. Yurin falls silent as he takes in the sparse field and scattered equipment. Spotting knives and small blades, he remembers that the Sichuan Tang clan specialized in throwing weapons. That connection makes him think he may have found a clue. He reaches for a throwing knife, hoping a direct attempt might trigger something. With Eren watching from behind, he steps into the empty field and prepares a throw. He fixes his eyes on the distant target and steadies himself. Holding the knife beside his face, he tries to imitate the stance of a hidden weapon user. He throws with all the force and confidence he can muster. For a moment he believes the motion looked impressive enough to matter. The knife lands pitifully short, nowhere near the target. Yurin hides his disappointment behind a shrug, realizing brute imitation is not enough to unlock the trait. Eren's quiet reaction makes the failure even more embarrassing. He laughs it off and claims he only threw it for fun. Changing course, he decides to build basic stamina first and asks about running laps instead. He tells Eren to train however she likes because he intends to work on his own. The moment he starts running, Eren is caught off guard by how serious he seems. Watching him pant through the effort, she can hardly believe Yurin truly came to the grounds to train. Elsewhere, the Marquis hears of this change and doubts it will last. Yet 3 weeks pass, and to his surprise Yurin does not skip training even once. During that time Yurin loses a great deal of weight, and his appearance changes noticeably. The Marquis begins to feel proud, thinking this perseverance is worthy of his son. From a distance, even Aaron has to admit that without the fat urine is actually handsome. The Marquis wonders whether his son has finally matured. As evening settles over the estate, Urin's transformation becomes impossible to ignore. Looking at his slimmer reflection, Urin admits the training worked, but the locked trait still has not opened. Even after all this effort, Sichuan Tang clan remains unavailable, leaving him frustrated. He decides to wait 1 full month, and if that fails, he plans to steal the protagonist's destined opportunity instead. Just then Aaron arrives with dinner, and Urin gratefully accepts. His status view identifies the meal as chirain soup, a Rock's family staple eaten after training because it burns fat and builds muscle. Urin groans at seeing the same soup again, clearly sick of the repetitive diet. Aaron notices his reaction and asks whether he is tired of it. He bluntly admits he is, since he has eaten nothing else for 3 straight weeks. Aaron cuts through the complaint by asking what he truly wants, simple weight loss or becoming a knight. Urin answers without hesitation that he wants to become a knight. Aaron reminds him that even the mighty Marquis eats the same soup after training, so he should stop whining. She firmly orders him to eat it if he is serious about his goal. Faced with her stern resolve, Urin reluctantly gives in. As he eats under her watch, he grumbles inwardly about the family's outdated customs. Still, he decides to endure it because the regimen is clearly helping him lose weight. He takes another spoonful, paying closer attention than before. The taste lingers differently on his tongue. That slight change makes him pause in confusion. He realizes today's chirain soup tastes subtly different from usual. A system notice suddenly reveals the truth. He has ingested poison. Before panic can settle in, another notice declares that this has fulfilled the unlock condition for Sichuan Tang clan. The trait finally unlocks, leaving Urin stunned. Shock quickly turns into exhilaration as he grasps what just happened. At the same time, the Marquis is so baffled by Urin's recent changes that he wonders whether this can really be his son. He keeps dwelling on how losing weight has made Urin unexpectedly handsome. That visible improvement tempts him to believe Urin may truly have matured. While he is still thinking, a visitor is announced and invited inside. A red-haired woman enters with tea and greets him warmly. She is Kaina, the second wife, and she notices his attention lingering elsewhere. The Marquis dodges the question by praising the beauty of the garden. Kaina happily credits herself for tending it and flatters him in return. Then she moves close and shifts the conversation to family politics. She presses him on when he will formally name Colin as successor, as he had previously promised. Insisting the matter is already settled, she argues it would be better to proceed quickly. Her touch and pressure make the Marquis hesitate. He answers carefully, signaling that he will not be rushed. To Kaina's displeasure, he says the decision needs a little more time. When she reminds him they agreed to choose Colin this month, he counters that Urin seems to have finally come to his senses. He points out that Urin is still the eldest son of the Rock's family, and deserves consideration if he is changing. The Marquis admits Urin might yet become a worthy successor. Kaina feigns relief and claims Urin's improvement is wonderful news for everyone. The Marquis even jokes that being scolded by his fiancée may have finally straightened the boy out. But Kaina's smile hardens as she asks what he will do about the succession now. He decides to keep observing, reasoning that 3 weeks of training is not enough to judge Urin fully. Still, he promises that if Urin ever returns to his reckless behavior, the successor position will immediately go to Colin. Kaina ends the meeting sweetly, and tells him to finish up before joining her later. Once alone outside the room, her pleasant mask drops. Her restrained breathing turns into visible fury. Seething with rage, she vows that Urin will pay for interfering. Back in his room, Urin receives another surprise as a new trait, for Heaven Tang clan, unlocks as well. He realizes this clan's specialty is poison and is baffled that the unlock condition involved actually consuming it. The absurdity of needing to be poisoned to unlock a poison trait leaves him speechless. Then a new thought strikes him. Reviewing the soup's description again, he notices a small symbol indicating there is more hidden information. He focuses on that mark and wonders whether the text can be expanded. The interface responds to his gaze and scrolls, confirming Eye of the Creator can reveal deeper layers. The hidden note exposes Halang herb, a mildly toxic medicinal plant that accumulates into paralysis and death, and Urin is thrilled by the discovery. His sudden excitement only confuses Aaron, who has no idea what he is reacting to. She simply asks why he has stopped, and whether he plans to finish eating. Urin hurriedly resumes before she can suspect anything. As he chews, he starts thinking through who could have slipped poison into the soup. He remembers that Urin was originally not supposed to die from poison, which means some key condition in the story has changed. That inconsistency convinces him the timeline has shifted, and he begins searching for the reason. He recalls that around this point Colin should already have been named successor. Since that has not happened, he suspects his own decision to start training disrupted the original course of events. If his training delayed the succession, then the motive behind the poisoned food becomes much easier to infer. He quietly reaches the conclusion and feels certain he has identified the culprit. A new notice appears, stating that the unlocking condition for mild paralysis poison has been fulfilled. Urin is delighted to see the poison branch opening up step by step. Aaron, still expressionless, hears him announce that he has finished the entire bowl. He even praises the soup with exaggerated sincerity, leaving her baffled. Aaron then asks to leave him alone for the night, and he readily agrees. They exchange goodnights as she takes the empty bowl and departs. The moment she is gone, Yurin's playful expression vanishes. Facing the mirror, he calls out to the newly unlocked For Heaven Tang clan. The system answers with his updated status, showing mild poisoning, mild muscle pain, and a high synchronization rate with the new clan. Impressed, Yurin realizes the interface can be manipulated with remarkable precision. By focusing on specific parts of the display, he finds he can zoom into details like a virtual menu. The clan tree opens to reveal branches for poison, hidden weapons, martial arts, and several locked paths. He decides to inspect the poison branch first. A long progression appears, from mild paralysis poison upward through increasingly terrifying toxins, most still locked. Amazed by the sheer number of poisons, he scrolls all the way down to inspect the full hierarchy. At the top end he finds formless poison and realizes the branch culminates in truly monstrous techniques. He understands he must unlock each lower poison in order if he wants to reach the strongest ones. But even the most basic poison cannot be used yet because it requires an inner skill method. That makes sense to him, since poison arts and martial techniques in this world depend on internal energy. So he opens the martial arts section to choose a foundational inner method. The first option, Overseer Poison Art, is a path specialized entirely around poison. The second, Lightning Art, favors hidden weapons, while All Poison Energizing Divine Technique develops both poison and hidden weapon mastery at the cost of slower progress. Yurin immediately decides that more is better, and that a true martial arts hero should take the path that grants everything. He selects All Poison Energizing Divine Technique, and the system confirms the choice. Golden energy surges through him as the new inner art takes root, and Yurin stares ahead, thrilled by the power now opening before him. Astonished that the mantra patterns have engraved themselves into his mind, the young master realizes he can recall the cultivation method effortlessly. Excited by that discovery, he decides to circulate the energy at once and test whether the method is real. He hurriedly strips down and prepares his body for cultivation without wasting another moment. Sitting cross-legged, he begins guiding the energy through himself as streams of power gather around his body. He senses an unfamiliar current moving through every part of him and understands that he is finally feeling chi. Following the method instinctively, he directs that chi through the proper meridians and stores it in his dantian to build inner force. As he continues, the night passes over the estate, while his cultivation deepens in silence. By the time dawn arrives, he is still immersed in the process without interruption. Morning light fills the room, yet he remains seated on the bed, having cultivated through the entire night. When he finally steadies himself, he is amazed that the stories about cultivating all night without sleep were true. He confirms with delight that he feels no fatigue at all after the long session. Instead of exhaustion, his whole body feels charged with fresh energy. His senses have sharpened so much that he can now perceive the flow of chi around him. That perception is precise enough for him to count the birds outside the window without even looking. He also feels his dantian as a warm, solid reservoir of gathered power. Pleased with his progress, he notes that he can now circulate chi through his head without needing a mirror to guide him. A status window appears and confirms that his all-poison energizing divine technique has advanced to 1 star at 10%. Before he can celebrate further, his sharpened senses pick up a familiar presence approaching from outside the room. He turns his attention toward the door as the visitor arrives. Aaron enters to wake him, only to find him already up and alert. Seeing the untouched bed, Aaron immediately realizes he has not slept at all. Caught off guard, he awkwardly tries to brush it off as something that just happened. Aaron scolds him for overdoing his training and insists he should rest for the day. He refuses at once, determined to keep training despite her concern. Boasting that he feels better than ever, he insists his condition is excellent and that he has to continue. Still uneasy, Aaron reluctantly gives in and decides to prepare breakfast first. She leaves the room still unsettled by his sudden change. Even as she goes, Aaron cannot stop wondering how he suddenly developed such a muscular body. Soon after, they move to the training grounds where weapons and targets have been set out for practice. He studies the selection of blades and throwing weapons laid before him. With quiet confidence, he chooses one as if something has already clicked in his mind. He picks up a dagger and tests its feel in his hand. Standing before the targets with Aaron nearby, he prepares to throw. Just before acting, he notices something strange happening in his vision. His eyes widen as he realizes the odd sensation is taking shape right in front of him. A game-like crosshair appears over the targets, and he instantly recognizes it as an aiming marker from an FPS game. The marker locks perfectly onto the bullseye, telling him exactly where to strike. Trusting that impossible guide, he throws the dagger with force. Aaron watches with mild concern, unsure what he is trying to do. He channels inner force into the throw, sending the weapon forward with a burst of speed. The dagger drives straight into the center of the target. Thrilled, he realizes the strange marker really can guide his aim flawlessly. At that moment another status message appears, unlocking the For Heaven Tang clan hidden weapons skill. Aaron stares at him in disbelief and demands to know what he just did. Pretending ignorance, he credits the result to the month of training finally paying off. Aaron immediately rejects that explanation as impossible. Amused by how flustered she is, he decides to try again and see what else he can do. This time, As he prepares another throw, he feels a hot surge of inner force rising from his dantian. He focuses on that sensation and realizes the power is directly affecting the motion of his throw. The heat climbs from his lower abdomen into his body as he readies the next attack. Confident that he can now throw faster and harder, he releases another weapon. The target is marked again as the throw races toward it with greater force. The weapon slams into the center hard enough to crack the board. The target shudders under the impact, showing that the strike was far beyond normal practice. Erin is left utterly stunned by the destructive power of the hit. She points out in disbelief that he damaged the target board itself, not just the bullseye. To him, the crosshair feels like a cheat skill, and he starts connecting it to his past life as a gamer. He recalls winning an FPS tournament before his transmigration and realizes that experience may now be turning into a supernatural advantage. Erin, unable to make sense of any of this, demands an explanation. Instead of answering, he asks whether she can sense anything unusual coming from him. After examining him, Erin says she notices nothing except that he seems to have lost a lot of weight since yesterday. That answer catches him off guard because he had been focused on inner force, not his appearance. Erin explains that he has been slimming down from training and the chi-rain soup, but today the change is especially dramatic. He accepts the comment outwardly while privately wondering why she cannot sense the inner force at all. That leads him to a startling conclusion about the nature of his power. He realizes that in this world only he may be able to use and perceive this inner force, making it a uniquely hidden ability. Delighted by that advantage, he eagerly suggests they keep practicing. He continues throwing and lands another clean strike on a target. A second target is pierced just as accurately, proving the precision is repeatable. Growing bolder, he prepares a new attempt with even more confidence. This time 2 daggers collide and pin together in flight, creating an even trickier shot. He celebrates the result while Erin can only gape in shock at what she is seeing. Unable to contain herself, Erin asks to try the technique herself. She takes a dagger and prepares to imitate him, curious whether the feat can be reproduced. Erin throws with effort, but her attempt lacks his impossible control. Her dagger flies off course instead of striking the center. It misses badly, proving she cannot replicate what he did. He teases her for finally finding something she cannot do, and she fumes at the mockery. As he laughs, a new idea suddenly occurs to him. Remembering the status window, he calls it up again to inspect what exactly has changed. The window explains that hidden weapon mastery has unlocked direct throw, allowing him to hurl not only hidden weapons but almost any object faster and stronger. He is thrilled by the implication that virtually any item can now become a weapon in his hands. While Erin still struggles with her failed attempt, he starts looking around for something else to test. His gaze lands on a new possibility, and he decides to try it immediately. He tells Erin to move aside so he can experiment safely. As she steps back, Erin notices he has picked up something unexpected. What he intends to throw is not a dagger at all, but a broken wooden sword. He raises the broken practice sword overhead, ready to use it like a projectile. As he focuses, a heavy stream of inner force pours from his dantian into his arm. He unleashes the throw with overwhelming force, as if executing a finishing move. The broken wooden sword punches into the target dead center and blasts through it with shocking impact. Erin is horrified by the sheer absurdity of a shattered practice sword becoming that lethal. When she asks what that power is, he again hides the truth behind a flimsy joke about hard work. Erin flatly calls that explanation ridiculous. Dropping the joke, he reminds Erin that she reports his activities to his father. He asks her to keep what happened today secret for the time being. Erin agrees hesitantly, though she is clearly unsure about concealing something this strange. He explains that he is still testing things and wants to tell his father himself once he understands more. Erin reluctantly accepts his request. As evening falls elsewhere on the estate, workers finish their day and head home under the sunset. Among them, a servant named Peru exchanges casual farewells and tries to leave as if nothing is wrong. Peru walks away alone through the grounds, carrying his bag and thinking he has escaped notice. He continues on, unaware that he is being watched. From a distance, the young master silently tracks him with growing suspicion. Using his creator's eye, he focuses on Peru to inspect him more closely. A status window reveals Peru has the traits Poisoning Level 1 and Swift Movement Level 1, with neutral favorability. The poisoning trait confirms the young master's suspicion that Peru is the one who tampered with his food. Seeing this as a perfect real-world test of his new abilities, he decides to act immediately. He aligns a floating projectile in his hand and aims it straight at Peru from behind. Choosing a non-lethal method, he activates a paralytic poison attack. Green toxic energy swirls around his hand as he launches the poison strike. The attack reaches Peru before he can react, and he senses something hit him from behind. A wave of weakness spreads through him almost instantly. Peru clutches his body in panic as the poison takes hold. He realizes with terror that he can no longer move. Satisfied that the technique worked, the young master declares the test a success. A status display even shows the paralysis will last about an hour, giving him time to interrogate safely. He drags the immobilized Peru away to a more private place despite the man's dead weight. Night fully settles over the estate as he relocates his captive to an isolated building. Inside, Peru lies on the floor groaning, still unable to resist. The young master forces him to stay alert, and calls him back to consciousness. Standing over him with a lantern, he asks whether Peru knows exactly who he is dealing with. Peru can only groan fearfully under the pressure. The young master threatens him with death unless he answers honestly and directly about the poisoning. His shout for Peru's name echoes through the empty building, sharpening the intimidation. He crouches in front of Peru and makes clear that he has questions that must be answered. To work around the paralysis, he orders Peru to answer by blinking once for yes and twice for no. He confirms that Peru understands the rules of this interrogation. Peru blinks once, showing he understands and has no choice but to comply. The young master begins by asking whether Peru was the one who put poison in his soup. Peru hesitates, clearly frightened by the question. At last he blinks once, admitting that he did poison the soup. With that confession secured, the young master presses for the exact substance used. He asks whether the poison was Hanyang grass, testing the knowledge he has pieced together. Peru reacts sharply, startled that the young master already knows so much. He blinks once, confirming that Hanyang grass was indeed the poison. Pleased to be right, the young master moves on to the next and more important question. He asks whether the person who ordered the poisoning was Marchioness Kana. The possibility hits him hard enough that even he tenses while waiting for the answer. Peru blinks twice, denying that Kana gave the order. The young master immediately warns him not to lie, drawing a blade to make the threat real. He presses the sword to Peru's neck and promises he will know if Peru tries to deceive him. Then he repeats the question, demanding again whether Lady Kana was the one behind it. Peru remains terrified but does not change his answer. He blinks twice again, firmly denying Kana's involvement. That unexpected denial makes the young master pause and reconsider his assumptions. Since Peru does not seem to be lying, he accepts for the moment that someone else must be responsible. Deciding he can uncover the mastermind later, he shifts from accusation to extracting more useful information now. He produces another substance and orders Peru to swallow it without resistance. As he forces it into Peru's mouth, he explains that this is an initial poison, tightening his control over the man for whatever comes next. The poisoned young lord wakes in cold sweat, realizing his body is already reacting. A black-haired man looms over him and bluntly declares that he has only 1 month left to live. The stranger tightens control by warning that only the antidote in his possession can save him before that deadline. He makes the threat vivid, saying the poison will melt the young lord's organs and forcing him into obedience. Pressing close with a cruel smile, he demands submission until the terrified victim yields. The young lord can only tremble and swallow his fear under the weight of that coercion. Satisfied, the black-haired man grabs his head and decides to test something first. He releases a weak paralysis poison to loosen the young lord's body and verify his poison control. The poison takes effect exactly as intended, leaving the victim startled by the sudden change. Once the paralysis is lifted enough for speech and movement, the interrogation begins. The black-haired man immediately asks who ordered the poisoning attempt against him. Cornered, the pink-haired poisoner hesitates before finally giving up the name. He identifies the mastermind as Knight Commander Carrick's Livingtine, which catches the young lord's attention at once. The poisoner explains that Carrick's wanted the young lord dead in battle before the year ended. The young lord connects Carrick's to Kana's faction and realizes the conspiracy is broader than he first thought. Setting that aside, he abruptly hands the poisoner a written list. The poisoner is shocked to find the paper filled with poisons, proving the young lord knows far more than expected. The young lord orders him to buy every listed toxin on the black market and bill Carrick's for it. He demands all of them by the next night, starting with whatever the poisoner already has. When the poisoner nervously asks why, he immediately regrets speaking. The young lord coldly reminds him that servants under threat do not get to ask questions. The poisoner quickly backs down and accepts the order. Pleased, the young lord dismisses him and sends him off to work. Just as the poisoner turns to leave, the young lord stops him with one more instruction. He orders that all future medicinal soups contain plenty of Hanyang grass. The poisoner is stunned because that herb is itself a poison. Left alone with the idea, the young lord breaks into delighted laughter at his own scheme. He revels in how absurdly useful martial arts and poison techniques are in this world. He laughs over how easily the poisoner believed his fake antidote, which had only been bundled dried leaves. With the deception settled, he resolves to quickly master the Four Heaven Tang clan's martial arts. He recalls that if events follow the novel he wrote, the outside world will soon be thrown into chaos. Time passes from day to sunset to night as he prepares for the next step. By the following night, the poisoner returns with the toxic herbs the young lord requested. The young lord inspects the gathered roots and leaf with interest. The poisoner identifies them as Hanyang grass, reverse green creeper, and ink raven leaf. He is baffled that the young lord can ask for several rare poisons at once with such precision. The young lord hides that his status window reveals every poison's properties and pretends this knowledge is basic. He then asks why Hanyang grass alone was not considered enough to kill him. The poisoner explains that Hanyang grass acts slowly and that reverse green creeper amplifies it once symptoms begin. He adds that layered poisons become stronger and much harder to detect. Interested, the young lord asks where the poisoner learned such expertise. The man says he was sold to the Livingtine family at 8 and trained there by a poison master. Of about 20 children forced into that life, only he survived. The young lord notes that poison affinity would explain that survival and sees the man as a potentially useful ally against living time. He ends the lesson with praise, satisfied that the delivery was successful. The poisoner bows gratefully and withdraws for the night. Alone again, the young lord decides it is finally time to begin cultivating the 10,000 poisons body scripture. He grabs the poisonous herbs without hesitation and starts eating them raw. Though the taste is revolting, he forces himself to swallow everything that same night. The system confirms that each poison has been ingested and absorbed by the scripture. A warning announces heavy poison overload, so he immediately begins breathing meditation to push the technique further. Sweating and grimacing, he endures the violent internal refinement. The night deepens around the estate, while he continues the dangerous process. By dawn, the long ordeal finally reaches its end. Morning light fills his room as the doors remain shut around his meditation. His white-haired attendant Aaron comes to wake him for the day. Aaron starts to announce that the young lord is up, then abruptly senses something strange. He opens the door and is stunned to find the young lord floating in meditation with a transformed physique. Aaron blurts out in disbelief at the sight of the once ruined body now lean and muscular. The system reports that the 10,000 poisons body scripture has reached 2 stars and unlocked small dragon's treasure along with several poison techniques. The young lord opens his eyes with quiet satisfaction at the breakthrough. Aaron, still trying to process the change, asks what in the world happened. Before he can get an answer, the smell in the room hits him hard. He recoils in disgust as the foul waste expelled from the young lord's body fills the room. The young lord awkwardly realizes what happened while Aaron nearly gags. He concludes that advancing internal energy and martial arts really does purge bodily impurities. Trying to stay casual, he offers to open the window while Aaron begs him to do something about the stench instead. Aaron urgently tells him not to linger there any longer. Barely holding himself together, Aaron orders him straight to the bath. After cleaning up, the young lord heads outside into the bright estate grounds. Aaron escorts him in tense silence, still unsettled by everything he has seen. The young lord, however, walks behind him in a very good mood. As they move toward the training area, the status window begins teaching him the first star of soaring dragon steps. He eagerly recognizes it as a movement art built for speed, evasion, and assassination. Even before mastering it, he starts imitating the footwork with obvious excitement. Aaron calls him back to attention, and the young lord recognizes him at last. Aaron worries that the young lord is suddenly walking like a drunk and asks if something is wrong with his body. The young lord insists he is fine while secretly trying to fix his expression and balance. He keeps wobbling cheerfully anyway, leaving Aaron speechless. Aaron asks again whether he is truly alright. He also warns that Training Hall 1 is full of knights and may be too much for him right now. The young lord brushes the concern aside and insists on going. He says he simply wants to see how the other knights train. Aaron relents and tells him they are almost there. At the training ground, the sound of drills and shouted breaths greets them. A knight repeatedly practices heavy overhead sword strikes. The training continues in disciplined rhythm as the young lord watches closely. Some knights notice the newcomers and wonder who the unfamiliar man beside Aaron is. They identify Aaron as the eldest young master's attendant and begin speculating about the handsome stranger behind him. The young lord's transformed appearance leaves them unable to believe he belongs to the Marquis household at all. When they realize he may be the eldest young master who recently lost weight through training, they are shocked. Whispers spread that the former glutton has somehow become this refined man, as if by magic. The young lord smiles because his strengthened internal energy lets him hear every word. He quietly revels in that new sensory advantage while Aaron notices his sudden intensity. To distract him, Aaron points out a trainee knight in the corner and tells him to watch. He praises the trainee's posture and predicts he will soon become a junior knight. The young lord recognizes the basic stances of Rox's swordsmanship and focuses on the man. He realizes the trainee is Clyde, a key future ally of the novel's protagonist, and is intrigued to find him here. As Clyde resumes training, the young lord thinks this unexpected encounter could become useful later. He decides to set that aside for now and turns his attention back to the knights around him. From the edge of the grounds, several knights keep watching him and Aaron with growing unease. Their status values plunge into disgust and hostility, making them ideal targets for his new poison experiments. The young lord decides to use them as test subjects and selects chain poison as his first trial. He chooses the pink-haired knight who had been glaring at him while pretending to practice. Without drawing attention, he activates chain poison on that man. The knight suddenly stiffens, confused by the abrupt internal disturbance. Pain crashes through him and he drops to his knees, clutching his abdomen as his sword falls away. His companions rush over, assuming he simply needs the bathroom, but he insists the agony is something else. The poison knight screams as the pain intensifies beyond endurance. The others panic and call for help, even suggesting a priest as he writhes on the ground. Then, just as suddenly, the victim realizes the pain has vanished. His companions stare, baffled by the abrupt recovery. The knight confirms in disbelief that the pain is completely gone. The others accuse him of causing a scene for nothing while he angrily insists it was real. The argument devolves into embarrassed shouting as the young lord and Aaron watch from a distance. Pleased with the result, the young lord prepares a second test. He activates soul-scattering mist, a hallucinogenic poison that induces fear and confusion in an area around them. One knight suddenly senses something impossible and freezes mid-argument. In his hallucination, a towering horned demon appears before him, and he screams in terror. Aaron and the young lord hear the outburst and turn toward the commotion. The hallucination spreads, sending multiple knights sprawling as they shriek for the monster to stay away. Aaron cannot understand why they are acting like that, while the young lord struggles not to laugh. To the afflicted knights, the demon even breathes fire straight at them. Another sees a flaming skeleton warrior charging with sword and shield and breaks down in panic. A third knight tries to fight back against the illusion, swinging wildly at empty air. When the vision flickers, he is left confused and terrified by what he just experienced. The three victims look at one another in shock, unable to explain the shared nightmare. The young lord decides that is enough testing for one day and notes with satisfaction that the technique is impressively effective. He calls Aaron to leave with him before anyone connects the chaos to their presence. When Aaron asks if they are leaving already, he says the place is too noisy and suggests returning to their original plan of Training Hall 4. As they walk away, a maid runs up and calls out to the eldest young master. She nervously reports that a guest has arrived and names Lady Ilia Marquis. Elsewhere in the estate, a purple-haired noblewoman waits by the window with a sword at her side. Thinking of Urin, she steels herself and vows that this time she will definitely break off their engagement. Her composed beauty hides the determination behind that decision. When the young lord hears the name Ilia, he turns toward the room in surprise. The woman is startled by what she sees when he appears before her. The young lord realizes that the fiancé he had expected to despise him has come in person. Ilia, unable to reconcile this man with the one she knew, blurts out a stunned demand to know who he is. Outside, the maid's report echoes the same shocking news to the young lord as he processes it. He repeats the question of who the guest is, still unsure he heard correctly. The maid hesitates awkwardly before finishing the announcement. She confirms that Lady Ilia has specifically come to see him. The young lord reflects that Ilia Marquis, his nominal fiancé, has finally made her move. He recalls that this was around the time she began insisting on breaking the engagement. But in the original story, the old Urin had stubbornly refused every attempt. Now he calmly decides that this time things will go differently. Inside the room, Ilia still stands by the window, waiting to end the relationship. She repeats her resolve that this time she will break the engagement for sure. Framed by flowers and light, Ilia remains poised and determined for the confrontation to come. Urin arrives and calls out to Ilia when he finds the purple-haired fiancé in a grand room. Ilia freezes in shock the moment she sees him. She can hardly believe the transformed Urin is really standing before her. Still rattled, she blurts out that she does not even recognize who he is. Urin, confused by her reaction, calmly introduces himself as Urin Rex. His casual greeting only makes her more stunned by how much he has changed in such a short time. Ilia insists she had dismissed rumors of his training and weight loss as impossible exaggerations. Unable to reconcile the timeline, she demands to know how he could have changed so drastically in under 2 months. Urin pauses as if choosing how to explain himself. He answers simply that he worked hard, which leaves Ilia even more incredulous. Urin admits that after Ilia beat him up before, he reflected seriously on himself. From that humiliation, he decided he had to change. Ilia immediately suspects he came back seeking revenge, but Urin firmly denies it. Instead of attacking, Urin suddenly drops to his knees before her. As Ilia recoils in alarm, he declares that he is actually grateful to her. He says her harsh treatment woke him up and leads him to offer a sincere apology for his past behavior. Urin goes so far as to say he will accept it if she wants to end their engagement over what happened. Faced with this utterly different man kneeling before her, Ilia can only wonder who he really is. Urin answers that he is still Urin Rex, only no longer the scoundrel he used to be. He bows again and repeats his apology with complete seriousness. Ilia is left speechless, struggling to process the sincerity in front of her. Urin rises from his kneel while the tension between them shifts from hostility to uncertainty. Privately, he admits this apology is not for the original Urin's sake but for his own larger plan. He recalls that Ilia Marquis possesses the Sword Queen trait, and that winning her favor matters strategically. He remembers that Ilia is no ordinary heroine but someone whose trait lets her grow ever stronger. In the future she becomes powerful enough to save the fallen protagonist and kill a major villain. So he reasons that even if the engagement fails, restoring their relationship and turning her into an ally is worth it. Ilia, still suspicious, demands to know whether he truly means what he is saying. Urin hurriedly swears that he is serious. Ilia answers by unleashing a crushing aura and orders him to swear he will never return to his old ways. The suffocating pressure nearly overwhelms him, but it also triggers a memory that this scene happened differently in the original story. Ilia forces him into an oath that if he breaks his promise, she herself will beat him to death. Urin realizes those words originally belonged in her future encounter with the protagonist, not with him. Barely able to breathe, he hastily invokes his poison-based divine art to resist the pressure. Ilia notices at once that something unexpected is happening. Purple lightning-like energy rises around Urin as he stabilizes himself under her aura. Ilia is shocked that he can withstand her pressure at all. Urin seizes the chance to reaffirm his oath and insists again that he means it. He swears clearly that he will not go back to being the man he was before. Ilia studies him in silence, weighing whether to believe him. At last she relents enough to say she will keep watching him from now on. She warns that if he slips even once more, the engagement will be over without discussion. Yurin is startled to realize she is not ending the engagement immediately after all. The scene shifts away from their meeting as the day passes over the estate. Later, Ilya reports to Yurin's father that she has met with Yurin. The Marquis presses her to reveal whether she has made a decision. Ilya answers that she has. She carefully begins to speak about the engagement. To the Marquis' surprise, she says she will not break it. He is so baffled by that answer that he asks her to explain herself. Ilya says she was curious because her father always taught her that people cannot change, yet rumors claimed Yurin had. She had wondered whether he had merely reverted to the weak but kind child he once was. Instead, she found someone entirely different, and that difference made her decide to trust him once. The Marquis can only absorb her answer in stunned disbelief. Ilya adds with deadly seriousness that if Yurin ever becomes a scoundrel again, she will personally kill him. Her threat is so absolute that it leaves no doubt she means every word. Rather than object, the Marquis awkwardly praises her resolve and entrusts Yurin to her care. Ilya then says she should leave, but the Marquis tries to persuade her to stay longer. She explains that she had already told her own father she intended to break the engagement, making the situation awkward. When urged to at least see Yurin again, she declines so as not to interrupt his training and departs with polite farewells. Evening settles over the estate as that meeting comes to an end. Soon after, Yurin is summoned to meet his father, who seems surprised to find him there already. The Marquis hesitates, as if unsure how to begin the conversation. Then, in a strange moment, he stares at Yurin and asks who he is. He quickly laughs it off as a joke and praises Yurin's hard work to cover his unease. Once the awkwardness passes, the Marquis asks whether Yurin knows why he was called. Yurin assumes it is to begin formal night training, which catches the Marquis off guard. Recovering, the Marquis agrees and notes that Yurin has become quick-witted as well. He proudly declares that Yurin will now learn the Rex family's swordsmanship. Yurin interrupts to say he wants to discuss that training plan. When Yurin asks instead to learn throwing arts, the Marquis is appalled. Yurin calmly confirms that throwing weapons are exactly what he wants. The Marquis denounces the idea as disgraceful and fit only for thieves. He argues that crude dagger throwing cannot pierce knight armor or even the scales of a low-level monster like a Borik. Yurin answers that if his father is so certain, they should settle it with a bet. He proposes wagering on whether he can kill a Borik using only a dagger. The Marquis scoffs at the absurdity of the challenge. Still, he condemns Yurin's stubbornness and refuses to let the matter go easily. He insists that only a blade empowered by aura can destroy a Borik's scales. From that belief, he declares that no amount of practice with throwing weapons could ever pierce such a monster. Yurin replies that if that is true, then his father has nothing to lose by accepting. He presses the Marquis to make the bet precisely because the Marquis believes victory is guaranteed. Annoyed but determined to crush Yurin's defiance, the Marquis finally agrees. Yurin sets the terms that if he succeeds he will control his own training, and if he fails he will obey his father's will. Night deepens as the wager is set and the test approaches. Back in his room, Yurin is relieved that his secret training has not yet been reported, because the practical test is already tomorrow. He wonders how many attempts it might take him to pierce a Borik's scales. To improve his odds, he decides to consume hidden poison herbs and raise his 10,000 poisons magneto-divine arts to the 3rd star. As he prepares, he senses someone approaching his room. A white-haired servant arrives at his door with a message from the Marquis. She informs him that the test will be held at noon in Training Hall 1. When Yurin asks whether she knows the details of the bet, she says the whole estate already does. He learns that the Marquis' household is laughing uproariously about the challenge. The servant explains that people are joking Yurin will either wet himself in fear or flee the moment he sees the Borik. She adds that everyone still treats him as the estate's public enemy, which only hardens his resolve. Yurin asks whether all those mockers are coming to watch, and she confirms the hall will be packed. He realizes the test has turned into a public spectacle. After a brief pause, he starts to form a new thought. He asks the servant what she thinks will happen tomorrow. She answers that tomorrow will probably become Yurin's day. By the next day his poison art has reached the 3rd star, and a huge crowd fills the arena to witness the wager. Among the spectators, commoners and retainers alike cheer with anticipation for the spectacle. Others laugh and call out as if they have come to watch a farce rather than a trial. Standing alone in the arena before the pack stands, Yurin notes just how many people came. From his seat of authority, the Marquis calls out and asks whether Yurin is ready. Yurin says he is, though he cannot help remarking on the size of the audience. The Marquis claims he only told his magician, but somehow the news spread everywhere. Yurin dryly tells him to be careful not to embarrass himself instead. An old magician steps forward and begins the test by casting short-range summoning magic. As the magic circle forms beneath him, Yurin is thrilled to witness real magic firsthand. The summoning detonates in a burst of light and smoke at the center of the arena. From the explosion, the silhouette of a monster emerges. Yurin is struck by how surreal it is to see something from fiction become real before his eyes. He reflects that he is literally seeing a monster he once created with words appear in person. The summoned creature is revealed as a Borik, a grotesque fish-like ocean monster about 1.5 meters tall. The crowd recoils in fear and disgust at the hideous thing now standing in the arena. Yurin, by contrast, is fascinated to finally see what the Borik actually looks like. He remembers with amusement that this monster was one of his own improvised inventions. In fact, he had conceived the borik on the spot while eating rockfish sashimi and searching for monster ideas. Looking at it now, he even thinks it might almost be cute if not for the arms and legs. The borik suddenly lunges, baring its teeth and attacking without hesitation. Yurin narrowly avoids the first rush with a startled but timely dodge. The monster's momentum carries it past him in a violent sweep that would have flattened him if he had been slower. The spectators scream, convinced they are about to watch Yurin die. Even the Marquis reflexively tries to stop the test, but he is told it is not over yet. The borik wheels around for another attack. Yurin calmly notes that the creature charges directly and without subtlety. Judging its movement, he concludes it is not nearly as fast as feared. He draws a dagger and decides to first test the thickness of its scales. Then something catches his attention mid-analysis. A targeting sense reveals a weak point on the borik, and Yurin realizes there is an exposed vulnerable spot. He decides to trust that opening and prepares a precise throw. The target lock settles on the unscaled area beneath the monster's arm. Yurin moves with sudden confidence, and releases the dagger in one fluid motion. The blade flies straight into the borik's weak point with explosive force. The dagger sinks deep under its arm, bypassing the scales entirely. The borik collapses on the spot while Yurin stands still, waiting to confirm what just happened. When it does not rise again, he realizes he has killed it in a single hit. The crowd falls into stunned silence, unable to process the impossible result. The Marquis is equally shaken, staring in outright disbelief. Then the silence breaks as the audience erupts into cheers for Yurin's success. The entire arena roars while the dead borik lies at Yurin's feet as proof of his victory. Praise pours down on him from every side, and Yurin accepts it with a restrained smile. The Marquis calls out to him, still too stunned to form a proper response. At last he demands to know how Yurin managed such a feat. Yurin casually claims he simply aimed well and hit the mark, which only frustrates his father more. The Marquis refuses to accept such an easy explanation. He protests that a borik cannot possibly die from a single dagger strike and that the result makes no sense. Yurin immediately corners him by asking whether the great Marquis Rocks would really go back on his word. Before the Marquis can wriggle free, the magician confirms that Yurin's dagger struck the unscaled spot beneath the borik's arm exactly where it would be fatal. The Marquis angrily insists that luck does not void a wager and refuses to let Yurin walk away from his win. He presses Yurin to play again, acting wounded by the refusal and trying to shame him into another round. To tempt him further, the Marquis sweetens the bet with an additional promise, drawing the crowd's attention. He declares that if Yurin wins again, he will grant him any one wish. Yurin repeats the offer to confirm it, while the Marquis warns that losing means returning to the original sword training plan. The Marquis then raises the stakes by revealing that this time Yurin will face not a borik but a real knight. Standing in the arena, he challenges Yurin to accept or refuse the new match. Yurin answers that he does not mind the change at all. Instead of shrinking back, he sees this as a chance to deal with Knight Commander Carix. Carix, hearing his name and the crowd's reaction, steps forward as a possible instrument to crush Yurin's arrogance. He privately relishes the chance to humble the boy who has been provoking everyone. Yurin briefly considers leaving Carix alone for now because he still needs access through Peru for his poison dealings. The Marquis dismisses the idea of using a fully trained knight, saying that would be too much for Yurin. He settles on a squire instead, presenting that as a fair compromise. Yurin is caught off guard that the opponent has been reduced to a mere squire. He immediately asks to choose the squire himself and names Kraid, surprising the Marquis. Someone steps forward in response to being called. Kraid, a massive trainee carrying a great sword, runs into the arena. He kneels before the Marquis and presents himself as ready for orders. The Marquis tells Kraid he has a task for him. Kraid eagerly vows to obey whatever command he is given. Pointing at Yurin, the Marquis orders Kraid to straighten the boy out. Kraid turns to look and freezes when he recognizes who he is supposed to fight. Yurin casually waves at him with a friendly smile, making the situation even stranger. Kraid is visibly rattled by the sight of his supposed opponent. The Marquis notices his hesitation and sharply questions whether he cannot do it. Under pressure, Kraid forces himself to accept the order and faces Yurin despite his unease. The Marquis tells him not to worry too much, as if this should be easy. Yurin cheerfully proposes the rules himself, saying he will throw only 3 daggers and count it as Kraid's win if all 3 are blocked. The Marquis fumes at Yurin's arrogance and orders Kraid to teach him a real lesson. The two take their places in the ring, Kraid with his sword and Yurin with his daggers. The watching knights mock Kraid and threaten him with no dinner if he loses. They pile on more humiliation by promising extra punishment if he is defeated. Amid the jeers, a woman's voice unexpectedly cheers Yurin on, catching his attention. Yurin is absurdly delighted just to hear a woman support him, while Kraid tries to pull him back to the fight. Kraid announces that he is ready, and Yurin finally turns his focus back to the match. Yurin raises his first dagger and prepares to begin with a light test throw. But as he lines up the shot, he senses something odd and realizes Kraid's defense is far more serious than expected. Kraid plants his greatsword in a perfect guard, covering multiple vital points so thoroughly that Yurin sees far more openings sealed than before. Yurin worries that a direct hit with this much force might actually kill Kraid. Deciding he cannot risk that, He chooses a straightforward path that will avoid lethal damage. The first dagger streaks straight toward Kraid in a blazing line of force. Kraid judges that this level of attack is manageable and braces to stop it. The dagger slams into his sword with explosive impact, shaking his entire body. Even though he blocks it, the force drives him back and leaves him straining in pain. The spectators are stunned by the cannon-like sound of the collision. The Marquis begins to realize this is far beyond a normal dagger throw. When the dagger drops to the ground after the clash, he stares in disbelief. He snatches up the fallen dagger to inspect it himself. Finding it ordinary, he cannot understand how such a simple weapon carried that much power. Kraid pants behind his sword, shaken and exhausted after stopping only the first throw. Yurin asks whether he is warmed up now and reminds him that lowering his guard even once would be dangerous. With a smile, Yurin lifts the second dagger and warns Kraid to be ready this time. Kraid, now desperate, resolves to block the next one with everything he has. Yurin notes that Kraid is still the kind of main character who can rise under pressure. Reassured that Kraid will survive, he commits to the second throw. He launches the dagger with a direct, forceful motion. The second dagger tears through the air toward Kraid with even greater momentum. Kraid roars and meets it head-on with his great sword. The impact detonates against the blade in a blinding burst. A cloud of dust and shockwave swallows the ring, leaving Yurin standing calmly before the blast. The crowd can only gape at what they just witnessed. The Marquis is left speechless as the dust hangs in the air. When the haze clears, Yurin is still standing untouched while Kraid has been blasted down. Kraid struggles back up on one knee, battered and gasping, his sword damaged from the exchange. His hand trembles as he reaches for the cracked blade to keep fighting. The Marquis watches in tense silence, unsure what to do next. He calls Yurin over, wanting to stop the spectacle and speak privately. Yurin refuses, saying the match is not over yet. He reminds the Marquis that one dagger still remains, shocking him. The Marquis finally tries to end it, but Yurin insists they should ask Kraid directly. Facing the kneeling squire, Yurin orders him to raise his head and answer for himself. Kraid looks up at him, shaken but still listening. Yurin asks whether someone who truly aspires to knighthood would accept such an unfinished ending. Kraid is moved but struggles to find words. Yurin tells him that a knight's way is to bring victory or defeat to a clear conclusion. He asks Kraid once more whether he will really give up here. Kraid hesitates only a moment before making his decision. He demands a new sword so the fight can continue properly. Rising despite his injuries, Kraid declares that he will not back down like this. The watching knights are stunned by his resolve. The Marquis is even more shocked when he realizes Kraid is awakening his aura as a mere squire. Blue aura begins to coil around Kraid and his replacement sword as he steadies himself again. Yurin is pleased because Kraid's berserker trait has manifested at the breaking point, giving him a chance to test higher techniques. The arena resets into a new tension as Kraid stands empowered while Yurin and the Marquis watch from the edge. Kraid centers himself with aura flowing around him and his sword held in a disciplined guard. He calls out to Yurin and demands that the final dagger be thrown. Yurin answers with a quiet refusal, ignoring the Marquis behind him. The Marquis realizes that Kraid's aura talent is already comparable to a high-rank knight, and wonders what Yurin will do. Yurin decides the situation is good enough for what he wants. He lifts the last dagger, now charged differently from the previous two. Turning into the throw, he prepares a new technique for the final attack. He releases the dagger with a strange spinning motion rather than a direct shot. Multiple afterimages whirl above Kraid, making the trajectory hard to read. Kraid senses at once that this attack is unnaturally slow and flimsy compared with the earlier ones. Feeling mocked, he roars and swings to smash the weak-looking dagger aside. His greatsword cuts through the cluster of images, scattering the false paths. The real dagger slips past the blade along a subtle curve. Kraid notices too late that something is wrong, and the Marquis realizes it as well. The dagger suddenly pierces into Kraid's shoulder from an unexpected angle. The strike drives inward with concentrated force that tears through flesh and shocks his whole body. Kraid screams as the pain overwhelms him. He collapses to the ground clutching himself while Yurin stands nearby, having ended the match. The crowd cannot understand how such a slow throw produced such a devastating result. Some accuse Kraid of exaggerating or going easy because Yurin is the young lord. Yurin realizes the attack carried little visible power but a deeply embedded inner force that caused excruciating pain. The Marquis calls to Yurin again, trying to pull him away for a talk. This time he concedes the wager and declares Yurin the winner. Yurin accepts the result with a satisfied smile. Kraid still writhes in pain from the lingering force in his shoulder. Yurin places a hand on him as green energy begins to gather. He tells Clyde to hold still and uses energy absorption to draw the painful force back out. Clyde is astonished when the agony vanishes immediately. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he bows deeply and thanks Yurin, who brushes it off. Then Clyde asks forgiveness as Yurin wonders what for. Clyde admits that at first he thought Yurin was insulting him, but he now sees the throw as a precise and subtle technique. He concludes that Yurin must have been hiding his true skill all along because no one could master such a move so quickly. His imagination runs wild, and he asks whether Yurin has been concealing his strength because some secret faction is targeting the Marquis family. Yurin realizes Clyde has built an entire conspiracy theory around him, and notes that this man really loves such fantasies. Clyde becomes openly admiring, treating Yurin's supposed secrecy as noble sacrifice. He pledges that if the day comes to fight this imagined hidden organization, Yurin need only call on him. Yurin checks Clyde's status and is startled to see his favorability has jumped to a friendly level. He decides this simple berserker's trust will be useful and politely ends the conversation for now. Clyde promises to spread the word that Yurin is no wastrel, and Yurin welcomes the chance to gain an ally who may one day sweep through a night order alone. As Yurin leaves the arena, his silver-haired retainer approaches from a side passage. She tells him he has worked hard, offering calm praise. He thanks her with an easy grin. Walking together, she brings up the final technique and admits she has never seen it before. Yurin casually says it was simply a new technique and asks what she thought of it. Erin answers honestly that after mentally sparring against it, she would have lost if she had faced it without prior knowledge. Yet she adds that now that she has seen it once, she believes she can block it. Yurin checks her traits and notes that her rare tranquil mirror mind, along with aura adaptation, explains that frightening composure. He reminds Erin that she has trained as a knight since childhood, and would likely already be one if she had not become his retainer. Then he asks whether she is truly content remaining as she is now. Caught off guard, Erin asks why he would suddenly ask something like that. The scene shifts away from the arena to the estate itself. Later, the Marquis sits alone in his study, brooding over what he witnessed. Yurin arrives when summoned, and the Marquis is struck again by the sight of him. Dropping his formal tone, the Marquis snaps that when they are alone Yurin should call him father instead. Yurin obediently agrees, though the sudden demand leaves him confused. The Marquis then presses him about the technique from yesterday, saying he found nothing like it in any throwing arts text. He insists that after only a month of training, learning such a deceptive technique should have been impossible. Unable to reconcile it, he demands the truth of what really happened. Yurin decides he cannot reveal the real answer but is relieved he prepared an excuse in advance. He calmly claims that he found a book. The Marquis repeats the claim in disbelief. Yurin elaborates that while searching the attic library for training manuals, he came across some old books. To sell the lie, he moves to produce one as evidence. But he trips over a book left on the floor and curses the bad luck. The book flies up and smacks him on the head, turning his carefully prepared explanation into slapstick. While recounting how everything began, he remembers a strange book suddenly falling from the top shelf in the estate library. The fallen volume had no title, only unfamiliar symbols carved into its cover, marking it as something unusual. Acting on impulse, he opened the mysterious book without considering the danger. The moment it opened, light surged out and forced knowledge directly into his mind. When he finishes describing that memory to his father, he adds that the book vanished immediately afterward. His father instantly realizes the implication and identifies it as a magic tome. He hides his certainty behind a calm smile, because he already knows exactly what a magic tome is. Inwardly, he recalls that such tomes are vessels left by great mages to pass down techniques and spells. His father explains that the family library is vast and inherited over generations, so such a treasure could have been overlooked. Rather than doubting him, the Marquis calls the discovery extraordinary luck for his son. He lightly agrees and frames the event as a fortunate windfall. Keeping an earlier promise, his father relents and says he will no longer force him to train with the sword. As he turns to leave, the Marquis remembers there was another promise still owed. He tells his son to name whatever reward he truly wants. The young man hesitates, calling out to his father before speaking his real desire. What he wants most is not wealth but the position that belongs to her. The request shocks his father because he is asking for the role of successor. He immediately softens the demand, noting that if he stated it plainly his father would never grant it. Caught by his own authority and promise, the Marquis reluctantly admits he ought to honor the request. Sensing that discomfort, the son presses him with a smile and makes the hesitation impossible to ignore. He explains that making him successor would stir conflict throughout the Marquis household. He even points out that the lady of the house would cause the greatest uproar, forcing his father to confront the political costs. Seeing that pressure land, he offers to make a one-time concession instead. His father, relieved, eagerly accepts before hearing what the revised wish will be. He reveals that he has no interest in becoming the successor at all. In truth, he wants to avoid a future trapped under his father's supervision and estate duties. He would rather spend that time mastering the 4 Heavenly Hall techniques and traveling the world for opportunities. His father, now willing to bargain, tells him to state a different wish. He asks for permission to establish his own night order, surprising the Marquis again. He specifies that he wants Aaron, his current butler, and Clyde, who fought him recently, to serve as his first 2 knights. Compared with naming him successor, the Marquis finds this request far easier to grant. He even admits Aaron is too talented to remain wasted in a butler's role. So the Marquis approves the request, and the son thanks him formally. His father then realizes that losing Aaron leaves his son without a butler. The son immediately suggests Peru from the kitchen as a replacement, though he carefully avoids making it sound like a personal choice. He asks his father to assign Peru by seeming coincidence, hinting there is a hidden reason behind the request. When his father asks what is really going on, he refuses to explain for now. Trusting him enough not to pry further, the Marquis agrees anyway. The son notes with satisfaction that his father now trusts him enough to accept unexplained decisions. A system window confirms that the Marquis' favorability has risen to a high level of trust, which surprises him. From that day on, he begins putting his new arrangements into action. In the training yard, he formally announces to Aaron and Clyde that they are now members of his personal Knight Order. He orders them to train hard during regular practice as the foundation of the new group. He also introduces Peru as his new butler and tells the two knights to get along with him. Aaron receives the news in silence, clearly unimpressed by his theatrics. Later, Aaron privately asks why he specifically wanted Peru to replace her. She points out that he deliberately named Peru as her successor and wants to know the reason. He answers with suspicious casualness, as if the explanation were simple. Then he bluntly claims Peru is a spy, leaving Aaron stunned. He says Peru was sent by Silverhawk Commander Carrix and Lady Kana to kill him. Aaron cannot understand why he would knowingly keep such a man close as his butler. She waits for a serious explanation, still baffled by his confidence. He leans in and says that now Peru obeys only him, making the danger useful instead of threatening. Back in the yard, Clyde raises a practical question for his new master. The son welcomes the question enthusiastically, while Peru looks nervous beside him. Clyde points out that even a two-person knight order should still have a chief knight. He argues that the chief knight ought to be the one with superior skill. Since Aaron looks smaller and less imposing, Clyde assumes she cannot be the stronger one. He concludes that strength should decide the matter, and the son immediately agrees. Seizing the idea, the son declares that the stronger knight should become chief right away. He orders Aaron and Clyde to fight a match on the spot, catching them both off guard. A brief pause hangs over the yard before the duel begins. Clyde barely has time to react before the outcome is already turning against him. In an instant, Aaron defeats him and pins him with her sword, forcing him to admit defeat. Without boasting, Aaron critiques his technique and says his attack patterns are too simple and easy to read. Flat on the ground, Clyde accepts the lesson and promises to remember it. Pleased, the son uses the result to settle the leadership issue of the Knight Order. He officially names Aaron the leader, while Peru is startled by how quickly everything was decided. He and Peru applaud the result, turning Clyde's loss into a strangely cheerful ceremony. As evening approaches, Peru excuses himself to go prepare dinner, and the son lets him leave. Watching Peru walk away, the son falls silent while Aaron resumes training in the background. He senses Peru's energy from a distance, and decides it is the perfect chance to test a new technique. The technique is whispering transmission, which sends sound directly to another person's hearing through internal energy. He silently calls Peru's name from afar, and Peru hears it as if spoken beside him. Peru instinctively starts to answer his young master before realizing no one is near. That impossible voice makes him stop in alarm. When the voice calls again, Peru panics outright. The repeated summons seem to come from everywhere at once, overwhelming him. Clutching his head, Peru realizes the strange phenomenon is happening inside his own hearing. Terrified, he wonders if this is some kind of black magic. Amused, the son tells him to think of it instead as a kind of communication magic. Peru, already poisoned and controlled, concludes that his master must also be immune to toxins. He convinces himself the young master is some sort of black mage who uses poison through magic. The son lets Peru keep that misunderstanding and tells him to focus on the task at hand. Through the silent transmission, he asks whether the poison he ordered earlier is ready. Peru reports that he has prepared Snake Mind, a deadly toxin refined from 100 venomous snakes. The son cheerfully orders him to put plenty of that poison into the celebratory soup he himself will be served. Peru recoils in horror at being told to poison his own master's meal. Still too frightened to resist, he runs off to obey the order. Time passes from sunset into the next day as the estate settles into a new rhythm. Alone in his room, the son closes his eyes and concentrates on his cultivation. When he opens them again, his gaze is sharper and more resolved. He exhales in relief after finishing another round of training on the bed. A status window shows his 10,000 poison invulnerable body technique has reached 3 stars, but is progressing more slowly than he hoped. Knowing he has limited time before a coming world crisis, he realizes he cannot remain in the estate any longer. He looks out through the window at the vast Marquis estate he is preparing to leave behind. He decides he has no choice but to leave the Marquis household and act on his own. So he informs his father that he plans to go out for a while. The Marquis is surprised but assumes he only means a short visit to the nearby town. He confirms that much without revealing the full scope of his plan. When asked how long he will be gone, he hides the truth that he intends to travel far away. Instead, he says he expects to be away for about a week. His father accepts that explanation but immediately asks what escort will accompany him, creating a new obstacle. He tries to dismiss the issue by saying he does not particularly need an escort. The Marquis reacts with disbelief at that answer. He sternly reminds his son that he is the eldest son of the Rex family and cannot travel carelessly. The son attempts to downplay the trip as nothing more than a visit to a nearby town. His father cuts him off and warns that the world is dangerous, especially if poison is involved. The son is baffled because poison is one threat that truly does not work on him. Realizing persuasion will fail, he pretends to yield and says he will do as his father wishes. He then says he will depart in 2 days, prompting the Marquis to begin arranging an escort. Back in his room, he stands alone and lets the false agreement settle. Privately, he scoffs at the escort plan and decides he will simply sneak out the next morning instead. To prepare for that escape, he turns to Peru for help. He tells Peru he is going on a trip and needs to borrow some money. Then he pointedly mentions the funds Carix gives Peru to maintain those costly poisonous snakes. With a cold smile, he asks why Peru would hesitate to hand it over. Terrified, Peru immediately laughs it off and agrees to lend the money at once. The son then reminds him of another useful item Peru possesses. He reveals that he noticed Peru's subspace pouch when he previously took out poison herbs. He reflects that a subspace pouch is the classic fantasy storage item, small outside but able to carry enormous cargo. Peru, unable to refuse, grudgingly agrees to lend that as well. The son is delighted since the pouch means he can travel without carrying visible luggage. After a brief pause, he remembers one more thing Peru will need. He hands Peru a fake antidote made from dried nsagui and tells him to take it. He claims it is a 1-month antidote for the poison already controlling Peru. Praising Peru's work so far, he promises continued favor if Peru remains useful. He sweetens the threat by saying that if Peru keeps serving him well, he will eventually provide a complete cure. At dawn the next day, the time for his secret departure finally arrives. Leaving a letter behind, he slips out quietly before the arranged escort can be prepared. Wrapped in a travel cloak, he walks through the estate grounds alone and unnoticed. Seeing the empty paths at dawn, he is pleased that no one seems to be around. That confidence breaks when someone suddenly greets him as young master. The speaker turns out to be an old gardener, who casually remarks that he is up early. He answers carefully, trying not to reveal his plan while studying the old man. Yet he senses an unexpectedly powerful presence from the seemingly harmless gardener. His special perception, the creator's eye, tells him this old man is no ordinary servant. He quickly suppresses the thought and decides not to probe further. Leaving that mystery behind, he heads toward the towering structure in the city. Walking the streets for the first time beyond the Marquis' castle, he feels the unfamiliar freedom of being outside. Something catches his attention and makes him stop in surprise. He looks up at the great tower and realizes this is the city's magic tower. Inside, he finds a hooded clerk seated behind a long counter and approaches with interest. When asked what he needs, he says he wants to use the warp gate. The clerk asks whether he has ever used it before, and he admits he has not. The clerk begins explaining the service, even mentioning a mileage program that the son privately recognizes as one of his own imported ideas. The clerk then asks for his intended destination. He answers that he wants to go to Asa Castle. The clerk notes that the destination is very far away, and he confirms that he understands. The clerk states the cost is 50 gold and asks him to sign the user pass after payment. Realizing travel by warp costs as much as expected, he is relieved that Peru had enough money to cover it. To stay hidden, he decides to use the alias Polion, a name he once used in online games. Accepted under that false name, he follows a robed attendant deeper into the facility. The attendant shuts him into the warp room and explains that a knock will mean the transfer is complete. Left alone, he studies the magic circle and marvels that this is where long-distance warping happens. Outside, the clock tower marks the moment of departure. Lightning strikes the tower, activating the warp with sudden force. He notices the jolt but feels no sensation of being transported. When the door opens and someone announces their arrival, he is baffled that the trip is already over. A cheerful mage welcomes him to Asa Castle as if nothing unusual happened. He is stunned that the journey ended so smoothly he barely noticed it. The mage proudly boasts that this comfortable warp experience is one of Mage's greatest achievements. That odd phrasing makes him suspect the settings may not have been what he intended. As the mage sends him off with customer service enthusiasm, he privately wonders whether he mixed up the warp options. With that confusion unresolved, he steps through the exit. Outside in the busy western city, he finally takes in that he has truly reached Asa Castle. Comparing it to the Marquis he knew, he notes that the western architecture and atmosphere are distinctly different. The crowded streets confirm he has arrived in a much livelier place than he expected. He asks for directions to the blacksmith's alley and heads there first, intent on finding the unicorn blacksmith. He enters the maze of narrow alleys as evening begins to settle over the city. After wandering through one cramped lane after another, he still has not found the forge he wants. Growing uneasy, he admits to himself that he has been searching for quite a while with no sign of the unicorn blacksmith. Seeing the sky darken, he realizes he is running out of time. At the last alley, he decides to check one final forge before giving up for the day. The ringing sound of metalwork tells him someone is still working inside. Hearing the hammer strike, he knows he has finally found an active smithy. He calls out, and the blacksmith turns in surprise at the unexpected visitor. The smith quickly shifts into shopkeeper mode and asks whether he is a customer. He confirms that he is and begins by saying he wants to ask about someone. Specifically, he asks whether any blacksmith around here is known as the unicorn blacksmith. The smith says no such blacksmith exists here, leaving him momentarily stunned. He worries he may have come to the wrong place after all. Then the smith casually reveals that unicorn blacksmith is actually the shop name he had been planning to use soon. That answer makes him realize he has in fact found the exact person he was searching for. Using Creator's Eye, he inspects the smith and learns his name is Jirnox, and that his trait is demon weapon creation. The appraisal also shows strong fire affinity with focus and precision, confirming rare blacksmithing potential. Delighted, he concludes he has finally reached the right forge. Rather than reveal his purpose immediately, he asks to see the weapons the smith has for sale. The smith gladly invites him to browse the shop's stock. As he examines the displayed arms and armor, he studies them with growing interest. To draw the man out, he casually asks how business has been going. Embarrassed, Jiranox admits the shop is hidden away and his skills are not considered impressive. He adds that even when customers do come, they only look around and leave, and he fears he cannot continue like this much longer. Yet the visitor can already tell from the displayed blades that these weapons are far better than their reputation suggests. His appraisal reveals one sword carries the blessing of the wind spirit and grants speed and foresight when activated. Another blade bears the blessing of a flame spirit and can boost strength, stamina, and steam output. When asked if he forged them himself, Jiranox shyly says yes, but his tone turns self-deprecating. He calls the spirit-blessed weapons failures, shocking the man who knows their true value. Jiranox explains that after forging them he discovered they were abnormally heavy, too much for ordinary buyers to use. The visitor realizes the problem is not the weapons but that unworthy hands have been trying to wield them. He understands that in the right hands these blades would reveal tremendous power, and that Jiranox still has no idea how gifted he is. Without hesitation, he decides to buy both of the so-called failed swords. Ignoring the smith's protests, he thinks they will be perfect for Aaron and Clyde, though they are not the true prize he came for. Then he shifts the conversation and asks a stranger question. He asks whether the smith has any badly rusted weapons, leaving Jiranox confused. Jiranox opens a chest of scrap weapons he had set aside. He explains that these are unsellable pieces he planned to dispose of later as scrap. As the smith dismisses them as worthless, the visitor senses that one hidden among them is exactly what he has been seeking. The moment his hand moves toward a particular dagger, he knows he has found it. When Jiranox notices his choice, he clarifies that this one was not his work. The smith says the dagger was already in the storeroom when he arrived and he kept it only because throwing it away felt wasteful. He immediately decides to buy that mysterious dagger as well. Jiranox, still bewildered by his taste, reluctantly goes along with it. Since every item chosen is defective, the smith offers all three for only 2 gold and throws in the dagger for free. Internally, the buyer is thrilled because if their true nature were known, each weapon would be worth far more than that. Then his thoughts shift from the weapons to the far greater treasure standing before him. He decides that more than the blades, the craftsman himself is what he truly wants to acquire. So he bluntly asks whether Jiranox would close his failing shop and work under him instead. The sudden offer leaves Jiranox flustered and unable to respond at once. Though not opposed to shutting down, Jiranox hesitates because the proposal is so abrupt. To steady the conversation, the young noble finally introduces himself properly as the spear guarding the south. He gives his full identity as Urin Rocks of House Rocks. The revelation that his customer is the Marquis of Rocks shocks Jiranox speechless. Overwhelmed, the blacksmith drops to the floor in apology for having treated such a lord casually. Urin hurriedly tells him to stand, embarrassed by the extreme display of deference. But Jiranox insists he is more comfortable bowing and begs his lord to speak freely. Resigned to the feudal reflexes of this world, Urin orders him up again anyway. Once calmer, Jiranox asks why someone so important would want to employ a blacksmith as lacking as him. Urin answers plainly that he wants him because of his special talent. Jiranox denies having any such gift and says his old master scolded him every day instead. That only convinces Urin that the man was trained harshly enough to mistake talent for failure. He explains that after visiting many forges that day, Jiranox's work stood out from all the rest. What set it apart, he says, was the care and dedication visible in every piece. He points especially to the meticulous handle wrappings, proof that Jiranox thinks about a warrior's grip and survival in battle. From that level of devotion, Urin predicts that one day Jiranox will awaken a truly special gift. Hearing such praise, Jiranox can barely believe someone would recruit him for simply doing his best. Moved at last, he agrees to follow Urin. Still, he hesitates as if there is one more thing he wants to say. Smiling awkwardly, he admits Urin is nothing like the ugly rumors surrounding him. Urin decides to answer that with a demonstration instead of words. He tells Jiranox he will show him something fun. Holding the old dagger, he prepares to activate what lies dormant inside it. He commands the relic to awaken, calling it Agnes, the relic of 1,000 forms. The dagger rises from his hand as white energy begins to swirl around it. A burst of light fills the forge, startling Jiranox as the relic responds. Urin recognizes it as the legendary ego sword that was originally meant for the story's protagonist. When prompted to form a soul contract with Agnes, he accepts without hesitation. The contract begins in a flash of golden light. The relic's core floats within a spiraling sphere of energy, as the forge is engulfed in wind and radiance. Then the voice that emerges is not the cute girl voice he expected from his own settings, but something far more abrasive. Agnes immediately lashes out, furious that someone like him dared attempt a contract. She scorns him as talentless, and he realizes the relic is judging him by his lack of mana. He dryly notes that her disappointment makes sense, though her attitude is another matter. Agnes keeps hurling insults until he compares her behavior to that of a delinquent schoolgirl. Demanding answers, Agnes asks how he knew where she was and even knew the release incantation. Urin says he learned it from the Great Prophet, privately remembering that this was only a convenient setting he once wrote into the story. Agnes refuses to believe such a prophet would ever entrust anything to someone she considers useless, and challenges him to prove he knows her abilities. With confidence, Yurin says of course he does, because he is the one who wrote them. He explains that Agnes is a free-form weapon able to split into a main body and a secondary body. Each part can become whatever weapon the user imagines, and in the original story the protagonist used them as sword and shield. Even if the secondary form is lost, it always returns to the main body. Agnes counters that none of that matters because only someone with mana can wield her. She smugly declares he will have to give up, but he remains unshaken. Calling her noisy, he points out there is another way to use her. To her horror, he compresses her fluid form into a ring and slips it onto his finger. As Agnes melts into that shape, Yurin realizes martial arts energy can substitute for mana and make the contract work. With the relic secured, he turns back to the stunned Jirinox and addresses him formally. Yurin asks how long it would take him to put the forge in proper order. Jirinox says 2 days should be enough, so Yurin tells him to meet at the central park of Az Castle at noon then. After leaving the forge, Yurin walks through the city already planning his next move. A familiar voice stops him, and he turns in surprise. He is shocked to see Ilya, the pink-haired woman who should not have appeared here yet, arriving on horseback. The sight leaves him momentarily speechless as he tries to process the change. Recognizing both Ilya and the location, he realizes this resembles the scene where the original protagonist was supposed to meet her. As she calls out to him, he understands that the story has drifted into the protagonist's route without the protagonist. When she asks what is wrong, he apologizes and concludes that the main storyline itself has changed. Ilya presses him to explain why he is here. Thinking quickly, he says he was searching for a blacksmith. Ilya finds that odd, since the Rex family already has many blacksmiths available. He explains that he wanted to hire someone of his own rather than rely on the family's people. Rather than object, Ilya says she would have helped if he had told her beforehand. He reassures her that it is fine because he already found a good candidate. Turning, he points out the approaching Jirinox just as the exhausted blacksmith arrives. Jirinox asks if he has kept Yurin waiting, and Yurin tells him he is right on time. Yurin begins introducing Ilya as his fiancée, but another voice cuts in before he can finish. A knight named Musk arrives to announce their imminent departure and demands to know who Jirinox is. Ilya introduces Yurin to Musk as her fiancé, making the hierarchy clear at once. The name Yurin Rex visibly unsettles Musk. Trying to recover, Musk introduces himself as the 5th deputy commander of the Iron Hammer Knights serving Marquis Marcus. Yurin greets him coolly after hearing the full title. Privately, Yurin remembers that Musk is a pathetic extra with a terrible personality, and recalls how the original novel used him. In that original version, Musk threatened a child who blocked his path while riding with his knights. The protagonist then stepped in to stop him, beginning the conflict. That clash led to Ilya intervening and meeting the protagonist, but Yurin now sees that the crucial part is what came after. He remembers that the protagonist later accompanied Ilya into battle and saved her life, and realizes he cannot simply hand that role back to someone else. Accepting that the plot has changed, he decides he has no choice but to act himself because he cannot let Ilya die. So he calls out to Ilya and asks where she is going. She explains that rising orc raids near Assi Castle have led her knight order to conduct reconnaissance and suppression. Hearing that, Yurin falls silent as he weighs the danger and the opportunity. Then he resolves himself and asks Ilya for a favor, setting up his next intervention in the altered story. Yurin suddenly insists on accompanying Ilya on the mission. Ilya is caught off guard and demands to know why he wants to come. He argues that he needs real combat experience, and also wants to witness her abilities firsthand. Ilya warns him that the operation could be dangerous. Yurin brushes it off, joking that even in his current state he is at least talented at escaping. His shameless confidence leaves Ilya speechless for a moment. She finally relents and orders Sir Musk to prepare a horse for him, shocking the knight. Sir Musk protests that this is a military operation, not an outing, and warns they cannot relax just because the enemy is orcs. Yurin coldly points out that he senses no mana from the orcs and that the unit has neither the duty nor the spare strength to protect them. Sir Musk tries to object again. Ilya cuts him off and makes clear that her decision is in order. Forced to obey, Sir Musk reluctantly agrees while the others watch the tension rise. He swallows his anger and goes to carry out the command. Ilya and Yurin share an uneasy silence after the confrontation. Soon the expedition departs through the city gate. Once mounted, Ilya sternly tells Yurin to stay close because the field will be dangerous, and he agrees. Yurin also reminds Jirinox to hold on tightly behind him, and the servant nervously obeys. With that, their group rides out at full speed. They travel far from the city into rough wilderness. At the search area, the commander orders the cavalry to split into groups of 5 to locate the orc village and to signal rather than attack if found. Ilya immediately leads her own group off in one direction. Her team gallops deeper into the forested terrain. By sunset, the search has dragged on without results. A soldier reports that the tracks are too chaotic to follow well and asks Ilya what to do now that darkness is falling. Ilya decides they have no choice but to return for the moment. Before they can withdraw, something in the distance makes the group freeze. A signal flare suddenly blooms in the sky. Almost immediately, another flare appears elsewhere, alarming Ilya and her men. More flares erupt from different directions, showing the whole search force is in trouble. Ilya realizes the situation is spiraling and asks how many flares have gone up. Yurin dryly corrects the count while everyone else panics. Ilya orders the team toward the nearest western flare first. They race hard across the rocky ground to reach the distress signal. As they arrive, Ilya senses something is terribly wrong. She finds a massacre, with soldiers and horses cut down, and realizes the entire squad is dead. The sight leaves the surviving knights horrified. Examining the corpses, they notice the armor has been melted and cannot tell what kind of attack caused it. Ilya suppresses her shock and orders the group toward the southern flare next. Her unit turns and charges off again without delay. They ride in formation through the devastated pass. As the carnage continues to unfold around them, Ilya begins to grasp the scale of the disaster. They come upon more bodies strewn across the ground, confirming another squad has been wiped out. A soldier urges Ilya to move on quickly to the next area, and she reflexively agrees. Yurin abruptly stops that decision. He insists they cannot keep moving right now. Ilya is startled when he calls her by name and challenges her judgment. Yurin explains that the orcs are picking off the scattered soldiers one by one, and that continuing like this means certain defeat. He argues they must halt the operation and gather the remaining forces with the recall flare. One knight angrily tells him to stay quiet and not overstep his place. The same knight blames the entire mess on an outsider like Yurin, while Yurin silently recalls that this is the point where the original protagonist was cursed by readers for making the wrong choice. He bitterly remembers that infamous failure and steels himself not to repeat it. When the knight keeps lecturing him about battle, Yurin cuts him off with blunt contempt. The insult leaves the knight stunned. The rattled soldier loses control and falls from his horse as the others shout in alarm. Ilya turns to Yurin, uncertain what he is trying to do. Yurin coldly puts the insubordinate knight in his place and demands obedience. The man immediately breaks and begs for mercy. Yurin warns that he is watching and forces the knight into submission. He then addresses Ilya directly, reminding her that in the original course of events she ignored sound advice and clung to her own assumptions. Yurin presses her to judge the situation properly now, before it is too late. Ilya falls silent, shaken by how accurately he has read the crisis. She admits that she failed to assess the battlefield calmly. Accepting his judgment, Ilya orders a blue signal flare to be fired to gather all troops to their position. The blue flare rises into the sky as the recall signal. While the order is carried out, Yurin watches the field from a distance as the dead are tended to. Jirinox excitedly praises Yurin for taking control of the soldiers. He laughs that Yurin made trained knights move exactly as he wanted, though Yurin dismisses it. Jirinox then asks whether many soldiers will actually be able to regroup. Yurin hesitates, already expecting the answer to be grim. He says most of them probably will not make it back because Kuruda has likely already been moving through the field and cutting them off. That prediction terrifies Jirinox. Yurin snaps at him to stop freezing and prepare for the real battle that is coming. The warning is immediately followed by the sound of enemies approaching. Ilya draws her sword as the soldiers alert her to the threat. A wounded knight staggers toward them in desperation. With his last strength, he begs them to run because the monsters behind him are too dangerous. Ilya can barely process the warning. The survivors form up around Ilya and Yurin as the enemy closes in. A large orc force emerges from the dust and surrounds the clearing. The front ranks surge forward with blades and axes raised. The mass of orcs keeps pressing in, threatening to overwhelm them by sheer numbers. Even Ilya and the knights are shaken by how many enemies there are. Ilya hesitates, realizing the odds are far worse than she expected. Yurin apologizes to her with eerie calm, saying that because of him they may all die here. Then his expression shifts, and he decides otherwise. He steps forward and declares that they are not going to die here, leaving Ilya confused. Facing the orcs, Yurin calls on Agnes and tells her to use what they practiced over the last 2 days. He orders the false body technique to create black iron pellets. As a pellet forms, he recalls that this is a hidden weapon skill tied to the 10,000 poisons invulnerable body technique, and that he has never tested it in real combat. Trusting the method anyway, Yurin hurls the pellet at the charging orcs. The projectile streaks toward the enemy with crackling force. It slams into the orc line. The orcs roar in confusion, not understanding the tiny weapon. Then the pellet detonates among them in a violent blast. A chain of explosions tears through the front ranks as Yurin watches the attack land. The smoke clears to reveal mangled bodies and shattered weapons scattered across the ground. Yurin calmly raises a finger, already preparing the next move. He recalls the pellets back to himself, delighted by how well Agnes' false body works with his explosive technique. The surviving orcs charge again through the smoke, enraged. Yurin dives through the battlefield as dark energy and blue force rip through more enemies. Another massive explosion erupts in the middle of the horde. Stunned by the devastation, Ilya asks what exactly he threw. Yurin casually names them black iron pellets and says he will explain later. He points out that the number of orcs has dropped sharply, and Ilya begins to see hope. The soldiers, who had been paralyzed moments earlier, realize they might actually win. Seizing that momentum, Ilya rallies everyone to finish off the remaining orcs. She charges first, leading the counterattack with the surviving knights behind her. Ilya cuts down an orc in a fierce opening strike. The knights follow her lead and drive their blades into the enemy line. one orc suddenly notices something far more terrifying approaching. A smaller orc crashes into an enormous red body and realizes too late what stands behind him. The giant red warrior casually crushes him aside. The lesser orc is flattened without effort. Ilya and the nearby knight turn in shock as the battlefield trembles. She stares in disbelief at the monstrous presence now looming over the field. The gigantic red orc appears carrying a dead subordinate in one hand, his sheer size alone announcing a far greater threat. Yurin recognizes at once that the true nightmare has finally arrived. The newcomer is revealed as the legendary orc warrior Karuta. Yurin knows that if Karuta is not stopped today, everyone here will die. Karuta roars and releases a terrifying surge of power. The shockwave makes Ilya and the soldiers recoil. Karuta swings his massive weapon with overwhelming force, scattering the battlefield. He catches a sword strike barehanded, showing monstrous strength. Then he leaps high into the air and aims a crushing blow straight at Ilya. Ilya realizes she must dodge, but she freezes for a fatal instant. Yurin lunges in, shoves her out of the way, and yells at her for just standing there. Karuta's attack slams into the ground where they had been, barely missing them. After escaping by a hair, Yurin blurts out that he almost died, while Ilya is left stunned by what he did. She can only gasp as the reality of the battle sinks in. Looking at her fallen men, Ilya is overwhelmed by grief for her subordinates. A towering orc warrior confronts Yurin and growls as the battle begins. Yurin immediately launches a black iron blast, trying to drop the monster before it can close in. The projectile streaks straight toward the orc's face with deadly precision. It lands cleanly, flashing across the orc's head as if the hit should have ended it. Instead, the blast erupts against him in a fiery explosion that barely slows him. When the smoke clears, the orc is still standing, proving his body is as hard as rumored. He answers the failed attack with a furious roar that makes clear he is unharmed and enraged. Yurin freezes for a moment as the orc's intimidation overwhelms him. He realizes his usual attack is not enough against an orc warrior whose skin is practically steel. Before Yurin can recover, Ilya steps in, furious that the creature dared threaten her men. Swearing she will not forgive him, Ilya draws her sword and surges forward with killing intent. She commits to a charging technique, betting everything on speed and force. Her first diving strike carves into the orc hard enough to draw blood. She follows through with a relentless spinning slash to keep pressure on him. The orc blocks and absorbs the blow, but her blade still bites into his tough hide and armor. Ilya multiplies her assault into a flurry of crossing attacks, forcing the orc to defend from all sides. Watching from behind, the surviving men cheer their captain while Yurin stares in surprise. Yurin realizes Ilya is already far stronger than she should be this early in the story. Even the orc's steel-like skin and armor begin to split under her swordsmanship. The orc snarls as the pain and damage finally register. Ilya presses in again, but his sudden change in posture warns that something worse is coming. A violent red aura erupts around the orc, transforming his rage into raw power. Ilya is shocked that an orc can use aura at all, because that should be impossible. The orc steadies himself inside the crimson energy, confirming the terrifying revelation. With aura amplifying his strength, he swings a massive blow that smashes through Ilya's offense. Just as in the original novel, Karuta overwhelms Ilya and sends her crashing to the ground. Her soldiers rush to support her as she struggles to rise after the crushing defeat. Humiliated and injured, Ilya admits that she cannot beat this monster. Seeing Karuta still advancing through the red aura, she orders everyone to run. Yurin instead steps forward and calls out, refusing to abandon the fight. Karuta notices the weak human challenging him and turns his attention to Yurin. Yurin quietly draws a dagger, preparing a more careful plan than brute force. He activates direct shot, deciding to attack with precision rather than power. The dagger flies in a sharp arc toward the orc at high speed. Karuta casually destroys the incoming blade with a single swing, exactly as Yurin expected. Yurin confirms to himself that the first thrown dagger was only bait. He stands his ground while Karuta growls, still focused on the obvious attack. The orc remains unaware that another projectile has already slipped into position behind him. Only when he senses something off does Karuta begin to look around in confusion. He finally notices the hidden dagger lodged near the gap in his shoulder armor. The concealed weapon detonates, blasting into his weak point from point-blank range. Blackened residue drips from the explosion as the trap's true effect settles in. Karuta is left with a mangled shoulder and a severed arm, badly wounded for the first time. Yurin reveals that the first dagger was fake and the real strike was the one hidden behind it. He taunts Karuta by pointing out that steel skin means nothing if some parts are still vulnerable. Yurin explains he targeted the weak point exposed through the cracks in the armor instead of the armor itself. Karuta trembles with murderous rage as he realizes he was outplayed by a human. Ignoring the loss of his arm, the orc leaps straight at Yurin for revenge. He brings down a huge aura charge slash that would cut Yurin in half if it lands. Yurin barely evades while the red blade tears through the space where he stood. As he retreats, Yurin throws another attack to keep the enraged orc from pursuing freely. A fresh explosion bursts against Karuta's face, buying Yurin a heartbeat of distance. Yurin mocks him for being furious, deliberately feeding the orc's anger. He makes clear that he never intended to let a stronger enemy catch him in a straight fight. Karuta's attention drifts toward the nearby survivors, and Yurin immediately notices the danger. The orc ignores Yurin's taunts and chooses the easier prey instead. Yurin realizes too late that Karuta is about to slaughter the others. Karuta launches himself high into the air above the defenseless soldiers with his sword raised. Desperate to save them, Yurin decides to pour everything into his small dragon's treasure trait. He boosts the trait to its limit and floods his body with inner power and lightning-fast movement. Karuta dives down toward a helpless man, certain he can kill before anyone reacts. Yurin's boosted speed creates multiple afterimages as he snatches the targets out of the strike zone. Karuta crashes into the ground instead, shattering the earth in a wasted attack. The orc turns in disbelief, stunned that his prey vanished at the last instant. Ilya watches in shock, unable to believe the speed Yurin just displayed. Carrying a rescued man to safety, Yurin realizes he can now move far faster than before. Karuta prepares to finish things, and Yurin calls for Agnes as he reaches for a final hidden weapon. He unveils Bloodflower Butterfly, a top-tier secret weapon of the Four Heaven Tang clan. Combining it with curved shot, Yurin sends the butterfly weapon into motion. The glowing butterflies arc unpredictably through the battlefield, circling around Karuta's guard. They drift like something beautiful and harmless, disguising their lethal purpose. Ilya can only stare, captivated by the elegance of the strange weapon. Karuta also hesitates, confused by the delicate things fluttering around him. The butterflies suddenly slash and explode across his body from multiple angles. One lands on his chest, and for the first time Karuta senses real danger. The weapon pierces inward at the exact instant it settles on his weak spot. Karuta screams as the hidden force tears through him from within. A massive explosion engulfs his torso and detonates through his body. Yurin watches in tense silence, waiting to see whether the final gamble worked. Ilya begins to understand that the beautiful butterflies were the killing blow. Yurin confirms to himself that the power he poured into Bloodflower Butterfly was enough. The attack punches straight through Karuta's chest and sends the orc warrior collapsing. The survivors finally dare to hope they have won as the monster falls. Ilya immediately warns them not to relax because lesser enemies still remain. A few smaller orcs stagger nearby, proving the battle is not completely over. Ilya regains command and orders the remaining enemies finished off. Once the last threat is handled, a grateful survivor thanks Yurin and the first true battle ends safely. That night, concern replaces battle tension as someone asks whether Ilya was badly hurt. Ilya admits she is not unscathed, but says she cannot complain after Yurin saved her life. Yurin brushes off the gratitude and turns the conversation back to the strange weapons he used. He explains that he is not a swordsman at all but a practitioner of hidden weapons. He clarifies that both the explosive sphere and the butterfly weapon were secret tools of that art. Ilya is astonished that hidden weapons can rival or surpass the sword she has always revered. Yurin gently tells her that a lifetime of worshipping the sword can make other paths hard to accept. Before the talk can go further, a soldier reports that the magic pouch for trophies has been prepared. Ilya decides that even if they cannot recover every corpse tonight, they must at least take Karuta's head. She treats the severed head as proof of victory and a necessary military record. With a sharp strike, Ilya finishes separating the head cleanly. The soldiers awkwardly worry about stuffing such a huge head into the pouch without making a mess. Ilya explains that the pouch was designed precisely for storing enemy commanders' heads, so there is no problem. Satisfied, she orders everyone to head back because the night has grown deep. As the group mounts up to leave, Ilya suddenly notices someone approaching. A late-arriving mounted officer named Musk rides in and calls out to her. Ilya sharply questions why he is only arriving now when the signal flare was sent long ago. Caught off guard, Musk struggles to answer. He claims his unit went too far out, got ambushed by orcs, and was delayed fighting through. Ilya immediately asks where the rest of his men are and why only 2 survived. Musk says the others were wiped out because the orcs were stronger than expected. Unsatisfied, Ilya demands to inspect the bodies herself. When Musk suggests waiting until tomorrow, she flatly refuses and orders him to take her there at once. He realizes he cannot avoid the request and reluctantly yields. As he turns, he mutters that he will now have to explain their original position, exposing his anxiety. Panicking, Musk suddenly draws a hidden dagger and lunges in desperation. Ilya senses the betrayal a split second before the blade reaches her. A counterattack instantly destroys Musk's weapon hand and sprays blood across the scene. He is thrown from his horse, screaming in agony as his failed assassination collapses. Yurin coldly exposes the lie, noting that Musk carries only human blood, not the green blood of orcs. He accuses Musk of colluding with the orcs from the beginning and leaking information, shocking the traitor. Ilya understands at once that Musk truly sold them out and prepares judgment. Musk begs for mercy and tries to hide behind his family's past service to the Marquis house, but Ilya rejects it outright. She cuts him down without hesitation, refusing to let treachery be excused. The remaining accomplice is seized as the moonlit purge of the traitors is completed. By the next day at Assi Castle, the story shifts from battlefield survival to noble society. Yurin sleeps late in his room until his servant begins trying to wake him. Still half asleep, he finally stirs at the repeated calls. Rubbing his eyes, he asks what is happening, and the servant urges him up because it is nearly lunchtime. The servant reveals that Captain Ilya has come to see him in person. When she enters, Yurin is stunned to find Ilya dressed elegantly rather than in armor. His mind blanks for a moment at the sight of her transformed appearance. He blurts out in disbelief, asking what happened to her outfit. Ignoring his confusion, Ilya simply tells him to come with her to her house. Yurin can only stare, unsure he heard correctly. Ilya explains that her father specifically ordered her to bring Yurin along, and asks him to come. Remembering that this invitation should lead to meeting Marquis Marcus in the original story, Yurin eagerly agrees. Pleased, Ilya says she will wait outside while he gets ready. As she leaves, Yurin checks her status and is startled that helping her once raised her affection so much. Later, in a bright castle corridor, Ilya waits for him amid the grandeur of the Marcus estate. She turns at the sound of his approach, calm and composed. Yurin arrives with an apology for the delay, and they set off together as onlookers begin to notice them. The people below erupt in cheers for Ilya, praising the woman who stood against the orc warrior alone. Yurin notes with satisfaction that Ilya has received the same iron-blooded knight title she had in the novel. Then his attention is drawn to a second wave of excitement building nearby. To his embarrassment, the crowd starts hailing him as Lord Yurin the Steel Magician and swooning over him. He awkwardly realizes that the surviving soldier's testimony has turned him into a public hero as well. Reasoning it out, he concludes they mistook his control of steel spheres for steel magic. Ilya then thanks him once more, this time for saving her twice. Yurin laughs it off and repeats that helping her was only natural. But Ilya's expression darkens as she recalls returning at dawn to recover the dead from the battlefield. She says the sight of their mutilated soldiers scattered through the forest was heartbreaking. With tears in her eyes, Ilya reveals that the carnage made her realize something she can no longer ignore. Ilya admits that if Yurin had not been there the day before, she would have met the same terrible end. Yurin falls silent, shaken by how close she came to dying. As she turns away, Ilya resolves to train harder and become stronger than before. Her determination hardens into a vow to rise above everyone else. Yurin realizes she is now set on fully awakening her talent as the Sword Empress and never losing again. Soon after, the Marcus family uses a warp circle to bring Yurin and his companions comfortably to their estate near Assi Castle. At Ilya's urging, the group steps into the prepared teleportation circle. The family mages activate the spell and begin the transfer. Their magic intensifies as the warp completes. A burst of light engulfs the hall and carries the travelers away. Yurin and Jiranox are startled by the sudden force of the teleport. They arrive in Marcus territory, and Ilya warmly notes that it has been a long time since she returned home. While Jiranox reels from warp sickness and the instant change of scenery, Ilya briskly leads them onward. Jiranox gawks at the grandeur of a noble estate, and wonders if all noble families live like this. Yurin brushes past the spectacle and turns his thoughts to the meal ahead. As servants dress him for dinner, he expects to finally taste true noble cuisine. He recalls that in the original story the protagonist ate nothing at the Marquis except chi-rain soup every day. This time, he thinks, things will finally be different. He eagerly anticipates enjoying an authentic aristocratic feast. Marquis Marcus receives them in the dining hall with a courteous welcome. The Marquis formally addresses Yurin. Yurin offers a proper greeting, but the Marquis immediately sets aside stiff formalities and invites him to sit. Yurin obeys and takes his seat respectfully. To Yurin's surprise, the Marquis begins by saying he owes him thanks. Marcus makes clear that before Ilya is Yurin's fiancée, she is first his daughter, and he sincerely thanks Yurin for saving her life. Embarrassed, Yurin insists he only did what anyone should have done. Before the conversation can deepen, a servant announces that the meal has arrived. The covered dish is set before Yurin with ceremony. He braces himself with eager anticipation. His hopes collapse when the Marcus family's special dish is revealed to be chi-rain soup after all. Marcus proudly explains that their version is richer than the Rox family's and that both houses traditionally eat chi-rain after battle. The Marquis cheerfully urges Yurin to enjoy it. Yurin forces a smile and accepts, bitterly remembering that in the original story this very soup was poisoned. As Yurin eats, Marcus abruptly asks when he intends to marry Ilya. Caught with food in his mouth, Yurin can barely process the question. Marcus clarifies that he means Yurin's marriage to Ilya, prompting her flustered protest. Yurin suspects the Marquis is testing him. Checking Marcus's low favorability, Yurin concludes he must answer carefully to overcome the man's initial dislike. So he boldly declares that he would marry Ilya immediately if he could. Ilya is stunned and blurts out at him in embarrassment. Yurin quickly adds that he is not yet his family's heir and that his reckless past still makes others judge him coldly. He promises to change himself, become worthy of Ilya, and only take her as his wife once he officially becomes heir. Ilya can only stare at him, overwhelmed. Marcus challenges him by pointing out that Yurin's younger brothers are famed geniuses and asking whether he truly believes he can surpass them. The question hangs heavily as Yurin measures the challenge. He answers without hesitation that of course he can. Marcus bursts into laughter, says the rumors of Yurin's change were true, and promises his support. Then Marcus mentions that a message arrived from Wellington before Yurin came. Yurin is startled to hear that news of his presence has already reached Rox. Marcus explains that Yurin's father wants him to make contact later through communication magic and offers to show him the chamber after the meal. Yurin thanks him, though the speed of the message leaves him uneasy. He pauses, sensing Ilya's mood shift again. When he notices her sulking over her soup, he is left wondering what he did wrong this time. Still, he concludes that at least he has made a good impression on Marquis Marcus. Later, preparations begin for Yurin to contact House Rox through communication magic. A mage performs the spell with theatrical words while Yurin watches beside the crystal device. The crystal sphere flares to life. A projected image of his father appears, and Yurin is struck by how much the magic resembles a video call. He awkwardly greets his father. His father immediately explodes in anger at him for causing trouble, and Yurin hurriedly begs forgiveness. The man's fury softens at once into concern as he asks whether Yurin was hurt, and Yurin assures him he is fine. After a pause, his father turns serious again. He asks whether it is true that Yurin saved Ilya and killed the orc warrior. Yurin downplays it as mere luck. His father accepts that for now, says he will hear the full story when Yurin returns, and asks when that will be. Yurin answers that he plans to come back the day after tomorrow. That timing pleases his father for some reason. Then the man unexpectedly orders Yurin to bring his brothers with him when he returns, leaving Yurin baffled. After the call, Yurin is already planning to leave as soon as the next day. Marquis suggests he stay a few more days since it has been so long, but Yurin begins to decline. He explains that his father has entrusted him with a task. Marquis regrets it but offers warp magic so Yurin can travel comfortably. Yurin answers politely while facing Ilya. To Marquis's surprise, Yurin refuses the warp. He says he still needs to strengthen himself through training and would rather not rely on shortcuts like teleportation. Marquis is impressed and remarks that Yurin truly has become a different person. Yurin encourages Ilya to keep growing stronger too, and she thanks him warmly. For the first time in a while, Ilya smiles at him. Yurin notices the smile and realizes that this answer pleased her at last. Yet the real reason he refuses the Marquis family's warp is that he has another destination in mind, and he quickly sets out with Jirinux. When Jirinux points out that the road to the capital lies elsewhere, Yurin says they must stop somewhere first. He reveals that he has business before reaching the capital. Pointing toward the great mountain beside the Marquis, he asks if that is where the dragon's lair lies. Jirinux confirms it, and says he visited the place before opening his forge. Thinking Yurin wants to make a wish there like other pilgrims, Jirinux asks if that is his purpose. Yurin flatly denies it. Instead, he reveals that he is going there to claim a treasure that only he knows about, one the original protagonist was meant to find much later. With that secret goal, the two head into the forest toward the mountain. At the cave called Dragon's Lair, they find crowds already gathered to pray at the famous site. Jirinux worries that with so many people around, any treasure should have been taken long ago. Yurin dismisses the concern and says all of those supposed treasures are fakes. He reminds Jirinux that the world hides many secrets. Leading him away from the public entrance, Yurin says they are going around the mountain instead. They reach a barren rock face on the mountain's far side. After climbing to the spot, Jirinux is left panting from the effort. Seeing only bare stone, he nervously says there is nothing there. Yurin studies the wall and asks himself whether this is the place. He recalls that he created the hidden entrance marker in the shape of a car door handle. After checking that no one is nearby, he positions himself before the disguised mechanism. Treating it exactly like a car door, he pulls the concealed handle. The mountain responds at once, stunning both of them. A rectangular seam appears in the rock. The stone wall begins sliding open, and Jirinux can only gape in disbelief. A hidden passage is revealed inside the mountain, making the impossible suddenly real. Delighted, Yurin casually announces that they are going in. He leads the way into the secret tunnel with Jirinux hurrying after him. Once they pass through, the stone door closes behind them. Inside, Jirinux is surprised that the cave is brighter than expected. When he spots a crystal that looks like a gemstone, he excitedly reaches toward it. Yurin stops him at once and warns that touching it will trigger a trap. Alarmed, Jirinux asks what kind of trap it is. Yurin grimly estimates the danger. He explains that the entire chamber would become a sea of fire and roast them alive. So he orders Jirinux to stay close behind him because there are many more traps ahead. Following a safe route, they move deeper into the hidden ruins. Yurin advances with quiet confidence while Jirinux watches in awe. At last they reach a stone altar in the innermost chamber, and Yurin declares that they have arrived. Jirinux is amazed, though he sees nothing on the altar itself. Yurin asks whether Jirinux knows what truly lies behind it. He explains that the public dragon's lair ends elsewhere, and that beyond this wall he can even sense the energy of worshippers bowing nearby. To drive the point home, he tells Jirinux that the people outside are effectively praying toward the two of them right now. Then, with a grin, Yurin suggests they finally inspect the real treasure. He reaches beneath the altar and pulls another hidden handle. The altar mechanism opens with a heavy rumble. Jirinux can only call the sight unbelievable. Inside are sacks of gold coins, enough to leave him speechless. Yurin ignores the money first and picks up a small blue box hidden among it. He reveals that what matters more than all the gold is what is inside that box. The box contains the warrior's jade, an item with the effect of rebirth that Yurin deems essential for growing stronger, and he orders Jirinux to pack the gold into a magic pouch. Afterward, when asked where they will go next, Yurin says they will head to the magic tower in Assi Castle and warp from there. But on the way back, Yurin suddenly notices that even now more people are still heading toward the countryside. A hooded figure appears nearby, and a chilling pressure instantly tells Yurin that something is terribly wrong. Using the eye of the creator, he recognizes the newcomer as that woman. The hooded woman stands before them in silence, radiating overwhelming power. Yurin is horrified because she should not appear until the latter half of the story. Jiranax notices Yurin's strange reaction while the woman remains turned away. Yurin can hardly believe that her aura is already this overwhelming. He realizes she is an existence he absolutely cannot defeat right now. His only thought becomes escaping as fast as possible. Trying to stay calm, he calls to Jiranax and orders him to hurry down to Asi Castle. Then he abruptly starts moving, pretending with forced casualness that he is simply hungry. Jiranax scrambles after him, begging him not to leave him behind as the hooded woman stays where she is. From behind, the woman watches them go without stopping them. She finally turns her head slightly, still saying nothing. Back in the city by evening, Yurin reaches a room and withdraws with the box. The quiet streets offer no comfort as his unease keeps growing. Alone on his bed, he stares at the treasure and admits that something no longer adds up. That terrifying being was supposed to appear only much later in the story, so her presence now makes no sense. He wonders why she showed up already and at that place of all places, and a dreadful possibility begins to form. Looking at the warrior's jade, he realizes the monster who should seek Dragon's Lair's treasure much later may already be moving ahead of the original story. Yurin realizes the story has drifted so far that even he no longer knows where the supposed protagonist is or what he is doing. Ignoring caution, he decides not to save the strange pill and swallows it at once. He rushes the process, convinced there is no point hesitating if he wants results quickly. The medicine sets his whole body ablaze, and he desperately circulates his chi to endure it. A system-like change begins, announcing a rebirth that will forge him into a stronger body, exactly what he wanted. The violent transformation subsides, leaving the room quiet again. Yurin remains seated in meditation as the rebirth finishes settling into his body. When he opens his eyes, he learns he has awakened a heavenly martial body and is stunned by the result. He recalls that such a body is a supreme martial constitution able to copy movements after seeing them once. Feeling light and exhilarated, he tests his body just as his blacksmith attendant Jiranax enters and addresses him. Yurin casually invites him in, still riding the excitement of his transformation. Jiranax comes to prepare breakfast but stops short when he notices something is very wrong. He blurts out that Yurin has somehow grown much taller overnight, leaving Yurin confused. Yurin tries to laugh it off as imagination even though he is already getting nervous. Jiranax insists his eyes are precise enough to judge measurements, especially as a blacksmith. He compares Yurin's old and new height, and confirms he has grown from 178 to 182 centimeters in a day. Yurin awkwardly accepts the change as another benefit of the heavenly martial body and decides it is probably a good thing. Soon after, they head toward the city's warp facility to travel onward. At the warp station, a clerk welcomes them and asks what service they need. Yurin immediately requests passage through the warp. The clerk asks where he intends to go. Yurin answers that he wants to reach the capital, surprising the clerk. The clerk informs him that travel to the capital is restricted, catching Yurin off guard. He explains that because of threats to the royal family, ordinary citizens without special status are barred from entering. Yurin inwardly scoffs at the class system but realizes he may still have a way around it. He abruptly declares himself the firstborn son of House Marquis Rocks, making the clerk pause. He formally introduces himself as Yurin Rocks and presents Jiranax as his personal blacksmith. The nearby mages react in shock at the name he just gave. They excitedly recognize him as Lord Yurin and the famed steel magician, while Yurin can only awkwardly confirm it. Before he can correct their misunderstanding, the attention around him swells. The mages bombard him with rumors, asking if he truly hurls endless iron balls and explosive magic. More questions pile on about how his magic works, and why they cannot sense mana from him. A sudden commanding voice cuts through the crowd and silences everyone at once. Yurin and Jiranax turn in surprise as an ominous presence fills the room. They find themselves before a private chamber as an unseen authority apologizes for his disciples' rudeness. Still wary, Yurin asks who exactly is addressing him. An elderly mage reveals himself as the head of Asi Castle's Mage Tower Council. He introduces himself as Yubian, and the name instantly alarms Yurin. Yurin remembers Yubian as a side character he once created for fun, a kindly-looking archmage who is secretly a murderous monster. Realizing another terrifying figure he never meant to truly face has appeared in reality, Yurin panics internally. Yubian courteously offers to warp Yurin directly to the capital from his own chamber, and Yurin hastily accepts. Just before sending him off, Yubian adds that there is something he wants to say. Yurin braces himself as Yubian ominously begins speaking for some reason. Yubian smiles with unsettling warmth and says he feels they will meet again, addressing him as Lord Yurin. Yurin forces a polite response while inwardly wanting nothing to do with that future. Outside, the capital's tower stands under a calm sky for a brief moment. Lightning crashes onto the tower as the warp activates and carries them away. They arrive in the capital's warp chamber and are told to step out. The capital formally welcomes them with all its grandeur. Jiranax is dazzled by the luxurious buildings and expensive-looking people, feeling as if they have entered another world. Yurin tells him to use the money he gave him to buy proper clothes if he wants to fit in better. Jiranax laughs it off and points out that Yurin himself is dressed just as plainly. Their destination turns out to be the Royal Knight Academy, whose scale impresses them both. At the entrance, a guard asks their business, and Yurin requests a visit. The guard asks for his name and the student he wishes to see. Yurin identifies himself, and says he has come to see his younger brother, Colin Rocks. Someone nearby reacts sharply to the name Yurin Rocks, drawing his attention. A silver-haired noble youth approaches, and Yurin immediately recognizes him as someone from House Elian. Yurin confirms his identity when the newcomer addresses him directly. The youth asks whether he is the same Yurin Rocks rumored to have helped defeat the orc warrior, and Yurin notes that news has already spread to the capital. The silver-haired youth studies him with growing interest and begins to test him verbally. He concludes that if the rumor is true, then Yurin must be quite strong. When Yurin stays silent, the youth presses him for a response. Yurin answers politely and asks who he is speaking to. The youth introduces himself as Carrick Elian, second son of Duke Elian. He adds that he is friends with Colin, confirming Yurin's suspicion about his background. Carrick offers to lead Yurin to Colin himself, taking control of the encounter. Though Carrick feels unfriendly and suspicious, Yurin decides to follow and tells Jirinox to wait behind. The two head deeper into the academy together. As they walk, Carrick mentions the rumor that Yurin and Lady Ilia defeated the orc warrior together. He says Ilia's strength is understandable, but Yurin's role surprised him. Carrick admits that little is known about Yurin and bluntly asks whether he is really a magic user. Yurin avoids revealing too much and only denies being a mage. Carrick reacts with a sly, pleased tone that makes his interest feel more dangerous than friendly. He smoothly urges Yurin onward, as if he has already gotten the answer he wanted. Yurin grows more suspicious, unsettled by Carrick's strange smile and attitude. Carrick finally announces that they have arrived somewhere important. Instead of Colin, Yurin finds himself at the academy training grounds, realizing Carrick has led him into a setup. The trainees greet Carrick warmly, showing he is at home here. Carrick asks after Colin, and the students answer in a way that immediately sounds wrong to Yurin. They remind Carrick that he himself took Colin to a professor earlier, exposing that he lied about leading Yurin to his brother. Yurin realizes Carrick deliberately separated Colin from him and brought him here for another purpose. Carrick presents Yurin to the trainees as Colin's brother and the man who helped bring down the orc warrior. Yurin tries to object, but Carrick keeps control of the narrative. Carrick declares that Yurin is not a mage after all, but a body-based fighter like them. He piles on rumors about daggers, metal orbs, and butterflies, making Yurin realize he is being turned into a spectacle. Carrick says everyone is curious about him, framing the coming humiliation as harmless interest. He openly asks Yurin to demonstrate his skill, and Yurin understands this was Carrick's plan from the start. Annoyed but cornered, Yurin agrees to play along. Carrick selects a student named Melrai, calling him average among the trainees, and sets him up as Yurin's first opponent. Carrick needles Yurin about supposedly using daggers, trying to belittle his style before the match begins. Yurin brushes it aside and chooses to use a wooden sword for this mock fight. Carrick mockingly praises him for even holding a sword and urges him to do his best while the others snicker. Yurin recognizes that these noble academy elites are already looking down on him for using daggers and treating him as inferior. He decides to use the insult as a chance to test the power of his new body. With the heavenly martial body empowering him, Yurin steps forward ready to begin. Melrai charges first, eager to crush him. Yurin calmly waits while Melrai boasts and offers him the first move. Instead of rushing, Yurin simply adjusts his grip and prepares a single strike. He swings once with explosive speed, catching Melrai completely off guard. Melrai barely raises his weapon in time and is shocked by the force behind the blow. The clash explodes as Yurin's strike smashes through Melrai's defense. The wooden blade crashes into Melrai's face and drops him instantly. Carrick and the watching students freeze in disbelief at how abruptly the match ends. Yurin himself is momentarily surprised by how overwhelming that casual strike turned out to be. Carrick tries to save face by claiming Melrai simply lowered his guard too much. Still rattled, he apologizes and immediately calls for another round. This time he sends out Mula, a stronger upper mid-tier trainee, while warning him not to underestimate Yurin. Mula rejects being compared to Melrai and confidently steps up. At Carrick's signal, the second match begins. Mula lunges in aggressively, aiming to overwhelm Yurin with speed and power. To Yurin, however, the attack looks almost motionless. He realizes the heavenly martial body has heightened his senses so much that ordinary movements now seem slow. Trusting that advantage, he decides to answer with another casual swing. His blade flashes out before Mula can properly react. Mula tries to bring his sword up to block, but he is already too late. Yurin's strike slams into his face as well, ending the fight in one blow. Carrick is horrified to see a second supposedly stronger student fall just as easily. Yurin stares at the result in disbelief, wondering why it happened so effortlessly again. He concludes that the heavenly martial body has pushed his strength, speed, and reflexes far beyond normal people. Carrick, sweating now, lashes out at the academy itself for producing such weaklings. Unable to accept the humiliation, he asks Yurin for one more match. This time Carrick declares that he himself will fight as the strongest when there. Yurin agrees without hesitation, almost cheerfully. The two face each other as the onlookers tense up for the real test. Carrick gathers himself and unleashes his full speed from the start. Yurin watches him closely, waiting for the decisive moment. Carrick bursts into motion so fast that after images seem to streak around the arena. He surrounds Yurin with a whirlwind of feints and rapid repositioning, attacking from every angle at once. Yurin notes that Carrick is genuinely fast and that the technique feels like fighting multiple opponents simultaneously. He understands Carrick's method as a tactic built to exploit any opening the instant it appears. Even so, Yurin remains still, tracking the true movement through the blur. Carrick commits to a heavy finishing strike from above, believing he has finally created his chance. With the heavenly martial body sharpening his perception, Yurin clearly reads the real attack path. He slips aside at the exact instant and sees the opening Carrick exposed. Yurin tightens his grip for a simple counter. He drives his wooden sword straight into Carrick's guard and body before Carrick can recover. The impact overwhelms Carrick's defense and blasts through his last resistance. Carrick collapses flat on the ground, and Yurin dryly marks the result with a casual apology. The surrounding trainees can only stare speechless. They struggle to understand what they just witnessed. A blonde trainee arrives and is immediately addressed as Lord Colin. Seeing Carrick down and Yurin standing over him, Colin demands to know what happened. Yurin turns to the newcomer and asks who he is. He is revealed to be none other than Yurin's younger brother, the famed sword genius Colin Rocks. When told that his elder brother Yurin has arrived, Colin reacts with open disbelief and contempt. He demands to know where Yurin is, not recognizing the man in front of him at all. Yurin flatly points out that the person Colin is looking for is standing right there. Colin refuses to believe it and angrily insists that this man cannot possibly be Yurin Rocks. Still staring in shock, Colin protests that Yurin was supposed to be fat, unable to reconcile the transformed man before him with his memory. Yurin's sudden transformation leaves his blonde older brother Colin unable to believe what he is seeing. Colin openly rejects the change and demands to know how something so impossible could have happened. Yurin brushes it off as simple weight loss, refusing to treat it as anything extraordinary. Colin insists it is more than that, because Yurin even seems taller now. Yurin jokes that losing weight somehow made him grow too, which only rattles Colin further. Nearby students who were beaten earlier lie groaning, making Yurin wonder what is wrong with everyone around him. One witness tries to explain the earlier incident to Colin, but Colin silences him before he can say too much. Instead of listening, Colin points at Yurin and flatly declares the whole thing impossible. As he stares Yurin down, Colin begins connecting the rumors to the man standing before him. He realizes the story that Yurin defeated an orc warrior might actually be true. Yurin confirms it without hesitation, removing any room for denial. Colin can only stammer in disbelief as he faces the brother he used to look down on. When Colin slips and addresses Yurin too casually, Yurin immediately calls him out for the disrespect. Colin still refuses to accept Yurin's rise and insists he cannot believe any of it. His disbelief turns into accusation as he claims Yurin could never have become this strong. Yurin coldly warns his little brother not to push him any further. Colin snaps back that he never once considered Yurin his brother anyway. He doubles down with cruel insults, saying Yurin has nothing except being born earlier and mocking his former weight. Smiling now, Yurin invites him to prove his superiority in a fight. Colin eagerly accepts, because a duel is exactly the chance he wanted. Yurin raises the stakes by proposing a bet, catching Colin off guard. He declares that the loser must grant one wish to the winner. Colin agrees and vows that when he wins, Yurin will crawl beneath his feet. Wooden swords are brought out, and the brothers take their places in the training ring while the others gather to watch. As the match is about to start, Yurin notices Colin's ally whispering something to him. He assumes they are warning Colin about how he knocked out those 3 students earlier. Colin grips his sword and calls for the duel to begin. He erupts with full aura from the very first move, choosing overwhelming force over caution. The spectators are startled that Colin is going all out immediately, and Yurin reads his status at a glance. Seeing Colin's sword emperor trait and natural talent, Yurin understands why his brother has always been so confident. Colin lunges in with a fierce opening attack, expecting to end things quickly. Yurin watches calmly and decides he has no intention of losing either. He activates Small Dragon's treasure and slips past the attack with effortless timing. With a grin, Yurin shows that Colin's confidence is misplaced. Colin's strike misses cleanly, and the momentum leaves him exposed. Yurin counters but deliberately avoids ending the duel in one blow, deciding instead to break Colin down piece by piece. He resolves to beat every bit of arrogance out of his younger brother. 10 minutes later, the fight has become one-sided, with Colin exhausted while Yurin keeps pressing him. Yurin lands another painful hit across Colin's upper body and forces out a groan. A second strike crashes into Colin's side, making him cry out again. The watching students can only stare in horrified awe at how brutal the beating has become. Collapsed on the floor, Colin finally begs Yurin to stop and admits defeat. Yurin answers by punishing even Colin's casual tone, striking him again for not showing proper respect. He continues the beating until Colin shields himself in panic and screams. Only when Colin is sobbing and pleading does Yurin lower his sword. Standing over him, Yurin warns that if Colin ever messes with him again, the next beating will be twice as bad. Terrified and in tears, Colin submits and calls him sir. With the duel won, Yurin turns to claim the wish Colin owes him. He demands that from now on, whenever they are together, Colin must address him as great brother. Colin is stunned that this humiliating title is the wish Yurin chose. When he hesitates, Yurin raises his sword again, and Colin hurriedly obeys. Satisfied, Yurin abruptly says it is time to go, leaving Colin confused about where. Yurin reveals they are heading to the Empire, to see their third brother Leon in the imperial capital. They travel there through the magic tower, crossing the distance in an instant. Arriving in the capital, the group marvels at having reached it through the tower so easily. Yurin explains that magic towers are neutral territories shared by every nation, which is why such travel is possible. As they take in the modern-looking city, they arrive before the Imperial Knight Academy. Yurin orders Colin to go inside and bring Leon out, and Colin obediently asks whether he should use the title too. A little later, Colin returns with Leon, the third brother, now dressed in the Academy's red uniform. Yurin greets Leon cheerfully while noting that his third brother is impressively tall. Leon stares in disbelief and asks if the man before him is really Yurin. Yurin confirms it with a smile. Leon praises Colin for bringing Yurin, not yet noticing the strange tension between them. Forced by the bet, Colin awkwardly answers with the humiliating title, startling Leon. Leon says he has heard a little about Yurin from their second brother, and Yurin immediately suggests they all take leave and head home together. Leon stops him and says there is a serious problem. He explains that the imperial capital is under lockdown, so people may enter but no one is allowed to leave. The reason is shocking. The imperial crown prince was assassinated that very morning. Yurin and Colin are stunned, and Yurin privately wonders whether this is an event he should already know. Leon confirms the news and says the prince was killed at dawn, throwing the entire capital into emergency. As Yurin thinks back, he realizes the tense streets and soldiers he saw earlier now make sense. He remembers the city swarming with troops and wonders who could have done something so impossible. Leon admits he only knows rumors, but he begins recounting what people are saying. According to the story, the crown prince's fiancée, a princess from another kingdom, had arrived only a few days earlier. At dawn he summoned her to the training grounds and proudly displayed his swordsmanship before her. Then, as he approached the applauding princess, the attack came without warning. Stone spikes burst from the ground and pierced straight through the crown prince's body in an instant. Priests nearby tried desperately to save him, but he died on the spot. Colin immediately identifies the method as magic and notes that using magic in the imperial palace should be forbidden. Leon says that is why all the tower masters from the mage's tower were summoned to the palace and why the city is in chaos. Colin is horrified that the crown prince died in his own courtyard and in front of his fiancée. Hearing that the weapon was a stone spike, Yurin suddenly realizes with certainty who the killer is. He knows not only who did it, but also why and where the assassin should be now. He remembers that this murder was supposed to happen much later in the story, meaning the plot has been dragged forward unnaturally. Yurin understands he needed more time for himself and the original protagonist to grow before this event. Still, he considers that gaining the heavenly martial body may have changed the course of events. He snaps back to the present and calls Colin and Leon to attention, with Colin still forced to answer as great brother. Leon asks why Colin keeps adding that title, and Colin can only tell him not to ask. Ignoring that, Yurin asks for the most famous inn in the area. Leon names Dragon's Tear and Giant's Faith, and Yurin immediately chooses Dragon's Tear. He orders the others to file for leave and submit a departure request through the magic tower for all four of them, trusting Rox's alias and their alibis to cover them. Leon agrees but asks what Yurin himself plans to do. Yurin says he is going to catch up with an old friend. As he leaves, he warns them not to pick a fight with Jirnox. The brothers are left baffled, unsure how Yurin could possibly have friends in the Empire. That night, under the moonlit streets of the capital, Yurin heads alone toward his destination. He arrives before a brightly lit noble-only establishment. Recognizing it as Flamberge, a bar reserved for nobles, he confirms he has found the right place. In a nearby alley, he changes into the formal outfit he prepared in advance. Once dressed, he moves on to the next step of his plan. He activates a ring and calls out to Agnes for help. The spirit in the ring wakes up annoyed at being disturbed from sleep, while Yurin apologetically asks a favor. He requests that Agnes disguise his face. Agnes is shocked that he knows she can do that, and Yurin dodges the question with a cheerful excuse. Suspicious but intrigued, Agnes asks what face he wants to wear. Yurin suddenly notices someone leaving the bar and tells Agnes to wait. He points to the departing nobleman and asks to be made to look exactly like him. Agnes eagerly begins the transformation by summoning a liquid skin-like substance. Yurin spreads the disguise over his face while picturing the target's features in his mind. The magic smooths his face into a blank mask before reshaping it. A moment later, he has become the image of the nobleman, complete with mustache and bearing. The guard at the entrance mistakes him for Baron Vare and is visibly surprised to see him back. Playing the role, Yurin casually says he has returned after all. He explains that he suddenly felt like having another drink, and the guard accepts it without suspicion. The guard waves him inside at once. Back in the bar, Yurin as Baron Vare orders the same drink as before while the staff treat him as a regular. Seated among the nobles, he notes that the infiltration has succeeded. He then concentrates his inner energy into his hearing to eavesdrop on the room. Among the conversations, he catches a woman saying the tower confirmed a certain man had no magic and chatting lightly about a trip and her boyfriend. The voice turns bitter as she recalls being abandoned without even a confession and condemns the man who left her. Then she admits the truth at the heart of it all: she killed him. Yurin realizes he has found his target, while the bartender continues comforting the distraught woman at the counter. The bartender tells her that old love can only be forgotten through new love and assures her she will meet someone better. The woman says talking to him always makes her feel better, sounding calmer on the surface. Yurin silently studies her from across the room, confirming his suspicion. He decides to test her by sending a telepathic message directly into her mind. The message reaches her, and she jolts in alarm. Yurin's voice taunts her by asking whether she enjoyed herself with the crown prince. She spins around in panic, recognizing the voice but unable to see its source. The realization drives her into a rage, and she screams at the unseen speaker. Her fury erupts outward and the entire building begins to rupture from within. A violent blast tears through the structure and blows it apart. Outside, civilians and guards are thrown into chaos as debris rains down from the collapsing bar. People shout that the building is coming down while the wreckage continues to fall. The destruction finally crashes into the street in a thunderous collapse. From the rubble, the disguised Yurin leaps clear before the guards can pin him down. He curses under his breath as he realizes she has gone berserk much faster than expected. The woman reveals her monstrous nature, rising on enormous stone-like limbs and demanding to know where the man from just now has gone. Yurin reads her status and sees she is envy of the 7 sins, with overwhelming killing intent far beyond what he expected. Envy locks onto him and snarls at the sight of a human daring to confront her. She vows to tear him apart, and Yurin grimly wonders whether he can win at all. Even so, he steels himself, because this confrontation is exactly why he came. His first objective is clear: he needs to make a weapon. Yurin focuses and prepares to draw on his power despite the danger closing in. He decides to retrieve the crown prince's corpse and forge it into a dagger. Envy notices his composure and asks if this is his true form. Pleased by his appearance, she declares she will capture him alive. She charges with monstrous intent, planning to turn him into a personal trophy. Her massive limbs spear toward him from every direction as he braces to counter. Yurin meets the assault head-on and launches a direct strike with his newly formed blade. When his first strike proves useless against the stone-skinned woman, he realizes brute force will not work. He immediately answers with black iron explosion, dropping a powerful blast onto her from above. The attack seems to pierce her chest for an instant, and gives him hope that he finally broke through. But the blast erupts without finishing her, scattering fire and debris instead of ending the fight. She recovers almost at once, amused that his attack simply lost force before it could kill her. As she mocks his strange magic, he understands his inner power is running dry and panic starts to set in. Refusing to give up, he prepares the same killing technique that once dropped an orc in a single blow. He adds curving shot, sending butterfly-like projectiles out to bend around her defenses. The glowing butterflies split apart and circle through the air to attack from multiple angles. Her stone spears lash out and swat the butterflies away before they can reach her. He grimly admits to himself that his power feels nearly exhausted and that he may be cornered. Looking back at the monster closing in, he cannot understand why his strength is vanishing so fast. As civilians flee the ruined street, he decides he has no choice but to keep fighting to prevent more deaths. He steels himself to hold the line alone until the capital guard arrives. The monster floods the area with more stone spears, turning the battlefield into a moving trap. One spear nearly skewers a red-haired bystander as the attack zone widens. The young man lunges in and intercepts the strike, taking the pressure onto himself to save the other man. The spear slams into the ground with enough force to throw the bystander clear. Landing amid rubble, he realizes the situation has become completely chaotic. He knows that if he keeps relying only on desperate dodging, he will eventually die. So he draws his sword, deciding to fight properly with a blade even if he has not mastered it yet. Instead of hidden weapons, he channels his inner energy directly into the sword to sharpen its killing power. The monster notices his change in stance, and eagerly braces for his next move. He rushes in and begins cutting through the incoming stone spears rather than retreating from them. His sword meets the spears head-on and starts chopping chunks from them. He confirms that although the monster is tough, the stone spears can indeed be cut. That discovery restores his confidence, and convinces him there is still a path to victory. The monster grins and treats the duel like a game, curious how long he can keep this up. She openly challenges his stamina, certain he will collapse before she does. In response, she multiplies the number of spears and sends a storm of them crashing down on him. He struggles to keep up as the barrage thickens faster than he can comfortably defend against it. Still laughing, she prepares an even nastier strike and dares him to block that too. Then her expression suddenly changes as poison and delayed effects finally begin tearing through her body. She clutches herself in pain, shocked that something hidden has been eating away at her from within. He reveals that every earlier poison attack had been stacking inside her, and the system confirms multiple toxins and a brief paralysis. Though the paralysis window is absurdly short, he refuses to waste the opening. He activates a speed boost and lightning-like energy surges around him as he charges. Before she can recover, he closes the distance in a blur and leaps straight at her core. With the paralysis about to end, he commits to striking first before the chance disappears. He aims through the narrow opening and pours every remaining bit of force into black iron explosion. The monster can only stare in alarm as the attack reaches her chest. The concentrated blast punches directly through her torso before she can defend. A massive explosion follows, engulfing her body and the street in fire and shockwaves. He lands hard but stays upright, waiting tensely for the smoke to clear. For a moment he dares to believe he has finally finished her. Her shattered stone remains lie scattered across the street, making it look as if the battle is over. Then the broken pieces begin melting and reforming into something new, destroying his relief. He can only watch in disbelief as the remains rise again instead of dying. The reformed mass gathers under ominous energy, and he realizes the nightmare is not over. As the monster vows to finish the fight, the system warns him that envy is awakening into Phase 2. He curses himself for forgetting that these monsters evolve through multiple death phases and grow stronger each time. The second form emerges larger and more monstrous, with even more limbs and stone mass than before. The transformed envy studies him with cold interest while he braces for another impossible round. Then she attacks with murderous intent, dropping all pretense and ordering him to die. A red-haired man is hurled away by the renewed assault as the battlefield becomes even more dangerous. The young man is forced back by faster, less predictable spear strikes and realizes Phase 2 is far deadlier. He barely twists away from another slash and knows he is losing control of the fight. He admits to himself that at this rate he will be killed. A sudden flash in his perception interrupts his panic just as another attack closes in. He springs upward to escape a cluster of spears that would have impaled him from below. Shaken, he realizes he survived by a hair, and that one mistake would have cost him his head. With the monster looming behind him, he decides he must run if he wants to live. Envy instantly cuts off that thought, mocking his attempt to flee. Her limbs crash down around him, hemming him in before he can escape. He ducks and scrambles through the gaps, still trying to avoid being pinned. Another spear sweeps in and slams into him, driving him backward. A wave of giant claws and spears follows, tossing him through the air like a rag doll. Towering over him, Envy laughs at how completely she now dominates the battle. She taunts him for thinking he could ever get away from her. He can only curse under his breath as the gap in strength becomes overwhelming. Elsewhere in the city, the scene shifts to a quiet district untouched by the battle. A hooded blonde woman in a dark blue cloak walks calmly through the night as if drawn by a distant disturbance. Hearing frightened reports that a monster has appeared, she immediately pays attention. As panicked citizens describe a creature covered in stone spears in the southern district, she listens closely. The mention of stone spears makes her stop and think, recognizing the description. She quietly identifies the monster as Envy and understands the danger at once. To confirm it, she asks the witnesses whether they are certain about the stone spears, and they insist they are. That certainty makes her suspect someone tied to the crown prince may be involved, startling the men. She moves to a rooftop and surveys the city from above, searching for the source of the disturbance. Sensing the direction of the battle, she pinpoints where the fight is happening. She leaps across the rooftops at once, cloak whipping behind her as she heads for the southern district. Back at the battlefield, the young man is surrounded again by the monster's closing limbs. Envy smugly suggests ending the struggle now that she has him trapped. She fires a long spear-like thrust straight toward him to finish the job. He raises his sword and braces, but the attack is coming from too many directions at once. For the first time he truly thinks he may be about to die. He turns toward another incoming strike with no clear way to stop it. At that life or death instant, the system unlocks 2 special privileges, including an upgraded creator's gaze that can reveal attack trajectories. He is stunned by the sudden change but has no time to question it. The battlefield transforms in his perception as predicted attack paths are simulated inside his mind. He searches the glowing lines for the exact route of the next lethal strike. Once he understands the pattern, the chaos starts to make sense. He realizes that if he can read those paths, dodging no longer has to be desperate guesswork. Using only the smallest movements, he begins slipping cleanly through attacks that should have killed him. The success thrills him, and he jokes to himself that he may soon dodge like a martial master. Envy is baffled by his sudden evasiveness just as the system opens a second privilege, a time-limited realm of ascension that activates before death. He feels his inner power surge to its peak and senses a dramatic rise in strength. White energy gathers around his sword, and he recognizes that the blade is entering a far stronger state. Holding the glowing weapon, he becomes convinced he can actually win now. From a nearby window, townspeople watch in awe as the battle turns radiant. They begin calling him the Knight of Light as his sword shines like a beacon in the street. Envy launches another spread of spear attacks, trying to overwhelm him before he can strike. He answers with a burst of lightning-fast sword movements, carving through the barrage in a blur. The monster recoils as he tears apart her limbs and closes the distance under a storm of white energy. For the first time in this phase, Envy cries out in fear. He rises above the shattered stone with his sword raised for a decisive finishing blow. Then he dives straight down, committing everything to one final strike. The glowing blade cleaves through her body with overwhelming force. A pillar of white light erupts upward through the city, marking the impact. The onlookers gasp in amazement at the blinding result. Seeing the broken remains below, they celebrate that the Knight of Light has defeated the monster. He pants and wonders if it is truly over, only for the system to warn that his power and stamina are completely drained. He admits he survived only because those 2 privileges appeared in time, and knows he must leave before the guards arrive. Just as he tries to gather himself, a new disturbance in the rubble makes him turn back. He stares in confusion as something impossible begins happening again. The shattered remains crackle with orange energy, and start violently pulling themselves back together. He realizes in horror that the pieces are reassembling at high speed, and the system announces Envy Phase 3, the final version. The final form appears as a blazing, spiked monster, furious and determined not to let him escape. He despairs, thinking he is finished and regretting that he never even got the chance to repay someone important. Envy, now enormous and wreathed in fiery energy, declares that she will kill everyone. Her rage expands from personal vengeance into a threat against all nearby lives. She forms a giant ring of burning limbs around him, trapping him at the center like prey. He can only stare at the monster's massive size and admit that his inner force is now completely gone. A lethal spear of fiery stone shoots toward him, while he stands too exhausted to respond. He freezes, certain this final attack will be the end. At the last instant, a flash intercepts the strike right in front of his face. Envy jerks in shock as her attack is suddenly stopped by an unseen force. Bands of cloth or ribbon-like restraints whip around her body and bind her in place. The hooded blonde woman arrives at the battlefield at last, extending a hand with calm authority. She restrains Envy further and scolds the monster for ignoring her presence. When Envy tries to lash out, the woman orders her to stop and reminds her companion that this is not the time to reveal themselves. The young man recognizes that these newcomers are not ordinary people and is left speechless. From the rooftop, the cloaked woman explains that they encountered this creature after descending from the divine dragon palace. The system identifies the woman as one of the 7 deadly sins, lust, confirming just how extraordinary she is. Remembering her warning about not revealing themselves, he wonders if that means they intend to withdraw rather than finish the fight openly. Lust decides immediately that they should leave before matters become more complicated. She leaps away, dragging the bound final form Envy with her through the night sky. Watching them depart, he realizes with stunned relief that he is still alive. Then another thought hits him as he listens for the approaching authorities. The city guards finally arrive at the ruined street, searching for the monster and whoever fought it. Not wanting to be found in this state, he slips into an alley to avoid any encounter with them. The night gives way to a peaceful morning, and the city returns to an ordinary calm. By daylight the same streets look serene, hiding all trace of the terror from the night before. Back home, a servant welcomes the young lord on his return. He tries to act casual and asks whether Colin and Leon are still asleep, hoping nothing suspicious has been noticed. The servant hesitates, clearly unsure how to answer. He explains that a terrorist appeared in the city last night, so the boys rushed out at dawn claiming they would catch the culprit. The exhausted young lord can only brush it off weakly as childish impulsiveness while stripping off his cloak. The servant starts to say more, but the young lord has already reached his limit. He collapses face first onto the bed and decides that sleep is the only thing he can manage now. After being left to rest with help nearby if needed, Yurin wakes from his recovery. He stirs from bed, still worn out but alert. Remembering his brutal fight with Envy, he realizes the ordeal pushed his 10,000 poisons body scripture to 4 stars. Yet that gain only sharpens his frustration, because even after advancing he still could not properly defeat the weakest of the 7 deadly sins. He vows that the present is not the time to act, but when the real crisis comes he will be ready. In his mind he sees greater sins and hidden evil forces waiting to spill into the world, confirming how dangerous the future will be. So he sits down to cultivate and steady himself. His resolve hardens into a single conclusion: he must grow much faster. Outside, rumors spread through the capital that the killer of the crown prince has appeared. While Yurin meets with his brothers, one complains that if he had found the culprit he would have caught him, though the destruction showed the attacker was beyond their level. The story grows wilder as they repeat that the assassin was a monster whose body erupted with stone spears and smashed buildings. When one brother struggles to follow the dramatic retelling, the other presses on anyway. They explain that a mysterious knight of light appeared, used light aura through his sword, struck the monster, and drove it away before vanishing as well. The tale leaves the brothers impressed and curious about the unknown hero. Yurin nearly gives himself away when they excitedly point to him as that knight of light. He quickly changes the subject by asking what happened to their departure application. His blonde brother reveals it was approved that day, helped greatly by the Rex family name. With that obstacle gone, they decide to leave immediately before another disaster traps them in the capital. Yurin orders them to pack and meet him in the lobby, and they obey. When they ask what happened with the friend he met, and why he looks exhausted, he shuts the topic down. Soon the story shifts to the Rex estate as they return home. A flash of lightning over the city marks the transition back to the family domain. The Grand Rex residence comes into view, announcing their arrival. Their father, the Marquis, greets the moment with open delight. Seeing his sons together again makes him genuinely happy, and the brothers hurry toward him. He embraces the red-haired son warmly, and jokes that the boy has grown taller. The sons formally announce their return, and the Marquis welcomes them back with satisfaction. After greeting Yurin, the Marquis immediately asks about the major incident that shook the empire. The eager brother offers to explain everything at once, but their father postpones the story, telling them to rest first and save the discussion for dinner. Later, back inside the estate, the household welcomes the young lord home. Yurin is greeted by Erin, a loyal female knight of the house. Erin praises him for returning after only a short absence with 2 new titles and much greater strength. Yurin is caught off guard because he had no idea what title she meant. She explains that he earned Iron Magician at Assi Castle and Rookie Slayer in the royal capital. The second title especially confuses him, since he had never even heard it before. Eren reminds him that he beat 4 Masterclass Academy students, which makes him realize where the rumor came from. Because those rising talents were called rookies, people started calling him the one who slays rookies. Yurin is left inwardly dismayed that such opponents counted as rookies at all. Trying to move on, he says he brought gifts for Eren and Clyde, but the butler interrupts before he can present them. Peru urgently stops him, saying this is not the time. He reports that the Marquis has summoned everyone to dinner immediately. At the table, the Marquis confirms they have rested and gathers his 3 sons before speaking. Before the meal begins, he announces that he has called them together for an important reason. He declares the start of a formal trial to determine the successor of the Rex family. Although the family normally passes the title to the eldest son, he says that under ordinary circumstances Yurin would have inherited it already. Instead, because Yurin wasted too many years, the Marquis had once intended to choose Colin as the next heir. Now, however, he acknowledges that Yurin has finally come to his senses. So he refuses to decide the matter alone and leaves the outcome to a contest between the brothers. He tells them they must prove with their own hands who is worthy to inherit. Colin and the blonde brother tense under the sudden pressure of the announcement. Yurin calmly asks how the heir will be chosen. The Marquis says there is no precedent, so he will divide the test into several stages, beginning with territorial defense. He explains that the season is approaching when mature monsters attack the coastline, and failure to stop them quickly would cost many lives. Therefore, the first trial will measure how well each son can defend the territory in real battle zones. To keep the judgment fair, he will assign 1 steward to each son to observe and report objectively. He further states that for this trial they may use anything at their disposal. That includes not only personal strength but also troops, allies, connections, wealth, and every other resource they can command. The blonde brother checks whether such broad methods are truly permitted. He is reminded that they are not competing to become knights but to become a Marquis. Their father stresses that brute force alone is not enough for a ruler, and that other qualities matter more. If they can, they may even borrow outside knights, because only the final results will matter. Yurin accepts the rules without protest. The blonde brother, already seeing opportunity, eagerly agrees as well. With the serious matter settled, the Marquis shifts the mood. He calls for the meal, and the servants enter as the red-haired brother cheers. Wanting to celebrate his second and third sons returning after so long, the Marquis introduces a special family dish. He proudly presents the family's original chirain soup with great enthusiasm. Yurin silently dreads what is coming. As the evening closes, the Marquis orders them to eat well and prepare everything they have, because deployment begins in 1 month. The next day, preparations for the succession trial become the new focus. When asked whether he will prepare too, Yurin acts as if he hardly needs to do anything. Peru quickly warns him that the other young masters are already moving, especially Colin, who is receiving support from the Livingtine family. Yurin immediately understands that Kana's birth family has chosen to back Colin completely. Rather than worry, he reduces the matter to one simple principle. The Marquis only asked for the best results. So he reasons that whether he borrows a knight order or fights alone, what matters is killing the most monsters. Peru reluctantly admits that logic while Yurin reveals he already has helpers on the way. He looks toward the door and says the friends who will help him wipe everything out have arrived. Eren and Clyde enter, and Yurin welcomes them because he has something prepared for both of them. He calls Clyde forward first, and the big warrior responds at once. Yurin explains an old custom in which a lord bestows a sword upon his knight, preparing to honor Clyde that way. He unveils a beautifully crafted great sword and gives it to Clyde. Clyde accepts gratefully, then freezes when he senses something unusual about the blade. The sword suddenly flares with strange fire in his hands. Though the flames swirl around it, Clyde realizes they are not burning him and is stunned. He blurts out that the flame is cold and cannot understand what kind of weapon this is. Yurin reveals that the blade contains the fire of a flame spirit, astonishing everyone present. When Clyde says the sword feels light and perfect, Yurin notes that the weapon has accepted him as its master. Yurin advises him to speak to the sword often so he can draw out its destructive power to the fullest. Eren can only stare, speechless at the absurdity of the gift. Then Yurin turns to Eren as well. He tells her not to be jealous because her gift has also arrived. Eren receives a slender sword and begins thanking him before the weapon reacts. The blade erupts with green light the moment she grips it. Wind aura whirls around Eren, lifting her hair and surrounding her body. She instantly recognizes the power as wind and is thrilled. Yurin confirms that it is a wind spirit sword. Listening to it, he realizes the sword itself seems to like her. Eren, delighted, asks permission to go test it immediately. Yurin allows it. Clyde excitedly wants to spar too, and Eren confidently tells him he still has far to go. Watching them rush off together, Yurin laughs at their enthusiasm. Peru, however, admits he is a little jealous of these spirit swords. Yurin promises Peru that he will get something good later as well, but first there is an old debt to settle. Peru brightens at once when Yurin reminds him about repayment. Yurin steels himself for what he is about to do. He dumps a mountain of gold onto a table, shocking Peru with the sheer amount. Yurin says he promised to repay the money many times over, while Peru protests that this is far beyond that. Peru realizes the repayment is dozens of times greater than expected, and is overwhelmed. In his excitement he praises Yurin as a genius not only in dark magic but even in gambling, which embarrasses Yurin. Yurin brushes that aside and says the money is for buying the poisons he wants, ordering Peru to act whenever called. Afterward Yurin goes to see Jirinox at the forge. He asks whether the smith is settling in well at the new place. Jirinox gratefully says everyone has treated him well thanks to Yurin. Yurin reveals that he has found masters for the 2 swords he bought from Jirinox. He explains that both the great sword and the thin blade have accepted their wielders and promises to show him later. Jirinox is relieved, admitting he had feared the swords were failures. Yurin corrects him, saying they are master-crafted blades that choose their own wielders and are extraordinary weapons. Moved by that trust, Jirinox thanks Yurin for believing in someone as lacking as himself. Then, after much thought, Jirinox says there is something important Yurin must know. When Yurin asks what it is, Jirinox hesitates before revealing a grave issue. He warns that there is a serious problem inside the Marquis household. The revelation unsettles Yurin, who demands to know what happened. To explain it properly, he asks his father for authorization to access restricted information. The Marquis refuses at first, insisting he must know the purpose because permits are not granted lightly. Yurin presses him directly, calling him father with unusual earnestness. He reminds the Marquis that since his humiliation by Ilya he has never failed him again. Yurin solemnly asks to be trusted with this permit too and promises he will not disappoint him. Seeing how serious he is, the Marquis finally agrees and tells him to collect the permit from the butler the next day. He adds that the authorization will only remain valid for 24 hours, which Yurin gratefully accepts. Yurin bows and takes his leave while the Marquis dismisses him. As Yurin departs with a faint smile, his father watches him in uneasy silence. Left alone, the Marquis admits to himself that being called father by Yurin weakens his resolve. He consoles himself that if the permit lasts only a day, Yurin probably cannot cause too much trouble. Morning comes, and the plan begins moving. A servant informs Yurin that men carrying boxes have arrived at the entrance, supposedly sent by the Marchioness. Yurin, already dressed and ready, says the timing is perfect. He orders all male servants to the entrance to move everything straight to Armory No. 1, stunning Peru with the scale of the command. Saying he has one more thing to fetch, Yurin tells Peru to meet him in front of the armory. At the same time, another servant delivers the temporary permit the Marquis ordered handed over that day. Yurin reads it, and immediately asks what the Marquis is doing right now. The servant begins to answer, unsure why Yurin needs to know. When told that the Marchioness has arrived and is taking tea with the Marquis in a side room, Yurin falls silent and decides on his next move. He orders the servant to tell the Marquis to bring an inspector to Armory No. 1 by noon. Then he coldly warns that if the message is not delivered exactly, the servant will regret it. As the frightened servant runs off, Yurin heads for the armory. At Armory No. 1 the guards stop him, saying unauthorized personnel cannot enter. Yurin points to the boxes being carried behind him and makes the guards look. Intimidated, one guard nervously admits that he sees them. Yurin declares that the crates contain swords, shields, and armor bought from Assi Castle for the coming expedition. He orders the guard to open the armory at once so the equipment can be stored, while the guard weakly protests that the armory manager must be present first. Yurin realizes the armory manager should already be on his way if anything unusual happened. The guard is confused, but Yurin presses the point that the manager must have been summoned already. He explains that any armory trouble would trigger an immediate report, and points out the manager rushing toward them. The armory manager arrives in alarm and demands to know what is happening. Yurin claims he has brought weapons and armor for the expedition and orders the armory opened. When the manager insists authorization is mandatory, Yurin reveals he expected that resistance. He produces an inspection permit and uses it to force the manager to comply. Cornered by the permit, the manager allows entry but warns Yurin not to touch anything beyond unloading his goods. Workers begin carrying large crates while guards and attendants gather around the armory yard. Pretending casual curiosity, Yurin asks Peru to inspect a weapon box and has one brought out from inside. The manager nervously protests that even viewing weapons requires special permission. Yurin feigns childish insistence and demands to see just one weapon. Unable to refuse outright, the manager offers to bring one out himself instead. Once the box is opened, Yurin orders it fully uncovered for inspection. A crate of swords is revealed, and Yurin asks for an assessment of their condition. Jirinox reports that most of the weapons look decent, prompting Yurin to challenge that judgment. Yurin sarcastically praises the manager and suggests he deserves a reward, making the man relax for a moment. Then Yurin abruptly orders every remaining box in the armory brought out as well. The manager is horrified as he realizes Yurin intends a complete exposure of the stockpile. He tries to stop Yurin, accusing him of abusing his authority even as the heir. Yurin answers with violence and strikes the manager in the face. The manager is knocked to the ground as Yurin rejects his talk of overstepping. Holding up the permit, Yurin condemns the manager's scheming and makes clear he sees through the deception. The Marquis arrives with his household, drawn by the uproar and Yurin's name being shouted. He finds the courtyard filled with open weapon crates and demands an explanation. Yurin bluntly tells him the entire armory has effectively been emptied and invites him to see the truth himself. The Marquis falls silent as he looks over the exposed stock. He reaches into a crate to inspect one of the swords personally. The moment he grips it, he is outraged by how poor the weapon is. He turns on the inspector, reminding him that the recent audit had reported no problems in the armory. The inspector panics and can barely answer under the accusation. The armory manager desperately claims Yurin must have tampered with the evidence somehow. An elder retainer rejects that excuse, pointing out that such massive theft could not have happened in only a month without help from above. Yurin states the obvious conclusion that someone powerful must have permitted the corruption. His pressure becomes so intense that the elder retainer starts choking in terror. Broken by fear, the man collapses and begs for his life, admitting he was wrong. Yurin tells his father that this is why he needed the permit, and why he could not reveal his suspicions earlier. He warns that the rot extends beyond this armory to the other armories and even the food stores. Yurin argues that surviving this year's expedition means nothing if the same decay remains for the years ahead. He asks who will suffer when superiors enjoy good weapons and food while the soldiers are left with the worst. Peru listens as Yurin says that if those above neglect their duty, the burden falls on the men below. Clyde is forced to confront that the soldiers would be sent into battle carrying worthless weapons. The Marquis's wife realizes with horror that they would also be fed food barely fit to eat. Yurin vows he will never forgive anyone who gambles with other people's lives. He presents the replacement chests he bought himself, filled with flawless swords, armor, and shields. Yurin asks that all unusable gear be discarded and his own supplies be issued instead. He further urges the Marquis to punish everyone connected to the armory and food store corruption without mercy. The Marquis is shaken by how far beyond his years and station Yurin seems to be acting. Yurin bows out, signaling that he has done all he can within his authority. As he walks away from the kneeling culprits, he reflects that anything further is now his father's responsibility. He leaves the rest to the Marquis, who must decide how to govern after this revelation. A few days later, Yurin is summoned back to the palace. He enters to find the Marquis waiting and asks why he has been called. The Marquis says Yurin's actions exposed the corruption and that he wanted to report how the matter ended. Yurin listens quietly, expecting the outcome. The Marquis confirms that Yurin had been entirely correct. He admits the corruption was not limited to one armory but had spread through the other armories and food stores as well. Worse still, the number of people involved was enormous, including trusted officials close to him. He confesses that discovering long-time subordinates among the guilty left him heartbroken. He credits Yurin with uncovering every last participant in the scheme. The weapons steward and inspector confessed everything so readily that the investigation became almost effortless. Privately, Yurin notes that his confession draft worked perfectly when he secretly dosed them that day. The Marquis says the incident taught him many painful lessons. He recalls that soon after becoming Marquis, he was publicly rebuked by the former king. That humiliation before the nobles had once felt unbearable to him. Yet, he says Yurin's recent words cut even deeper because they were true. He admits Yurin spoke honestly, prepared a solution in advance, and exposed how badly he had failed as a father and lord. Then, to Yurin's shock, the Marquis asks his son to forgive him. He apologizes for showing Yurin such a disgraceful father. Yurin is left speechless by the sincerity of the apology. The Marquis, uncertain, asks if Yurin truly feels nothing but resentment. Yurin answers lightly that he himself spent years causing trouble before finally coming to his senses, and that everyone makes mistakes. The Marquis is stunned by that unexpected generosity. Their exchange softens into mutual respect, and the Marquis promises he will not repeat the same failure. Later, as night falls over the estate, Peru brings urgent news to Yurin. The poison Yurin ordered has arrived, a neurotoxin derived from steelcap mushrooms that causes paralysis and respiratory failure. Yurin explains he prepared it because aquatic monsters should be vulnerable to anything that worsens breathing on land, and he praises Peru's work. Peru then asks whether Yurin has heard the latest rumors spreading outside the estate. He says Yurin's popularity among the territory's people has suddenly become astonishing. Yurin is baffled and tries to dismiss the idea that he could be popular. Peru insists that while traveling for the poison he heard people everywhere talking about Yurin. The commoners were moved by Yurin's declaration that the soldiers' welfare mattered most, and by his spending his own money to equip them. Yurin can hardly believe his old reputation as a delinquent could change so quickly. Peru adds that some townsfolk are even volunteering to join Yurin's unit for the coming campaign. He gleefully concludes that Yurin planned this outcome all along and has solved the troop shortage. Yurin, overwhelmed by Peru's enthusiasm, brusquely sends him away. Peru departs cheerfully, leaving Yurin alone with the strange turn of events. Watching the door close, Yurin mutters at the absurdity of it all. He reflects that Yurin's reputation improving was the last development he ever expected. Still, he turns back to practical matters and wonders whether to develop another poison. When he consumes the steelcap toxin, his cultivation technique absorbs it, unlocks 100 poisons immunity, and erases all pain and symptoms. Yurin is startled by the sudden breakthrough. Meditating through the process, he realizes that accepting poison now feels comfortable rather than painful. He marvels at how extraordinary 100 poisons immunity is. Morning comes over the estate as the next stage of events begins. While sitting in meditation, Yurin notices another system response. A new poison is unlocked, Hagen Serpentbane, a neurotoxin potent enough to kill a legendary sea creature and leave no trace in humans. Yurin finds it odd that he intended to unlock something weaker, yet a more advanced poison appeared instead. He suspects his 10,000 poisons body scripture has advanced to an intermediate tier, allowing stronger poisons as his inner cultivation rises. Pleased by that possibility, he is interrupted when Peru calls for him again. Yurin summons Peru closer, saying the timing is perfect. He hands over a list and orders these poisons prepared as quickly as possible. Peru is alarmed by how long the list is but accepts the task. Yurin confirms that the scale is intentional. He decides to spend his excess money on mass poison absorption and push the 10,000 poisons body scripture to 5 stars before the campaign. But when the day of departure arrives, that plan remains unfinished. At the departure ceremony, ranks of soldiers gather before the palace as the heirs prepare to leave for their assigned sectors. Yurin stands with Eren and Clyde when Peru nervously calls out to him. Peru anxiously asks whether they will really be alright. He points out that the other heirs command enormous night orders while Yurin's force is tiny. Yurin has only Eren and Clyde beside him, and Peru cannot understand why the volunteers were not accepted. Yurin answers with a grin that he has already made plans for that problem. Eren and Clyde laugh among themselves, leaving Yurin momentarily puzzled. Misreading their reaction, Yurin bristles and Peru hurriedly begs him not to start a fight. Before anything escalates, the Marquis arrives and everyone's attention shifts to him. He orders everyone to rise and confirms that all forces are assembled. The Marquis says he will keep his speech brief. He promises to stand where the danger is greatest and declares that he will be at the very front, asking his men to follow him. He rallies them to fight for their land. The soldiers answer with a thunderous cheer. Yurin watches calmly as the campaign begins and the 3 heirs depart for different defensive sectors, reaching his own assigned terrain 2 days later. At his destination, Yurin rides to the fortress gate and orders it opened, identifying himself. The wall steward Hans welcomes him but hesitates, clearly troubled by something. Yurin enters the coastal post with only Peru, Eren, Clyde, and one other attendant accompanying him. Hans stares at the tiny party and asks uneasily whether this is really everyone. Yurin, unbothered, asks why that should be a problem. Hans explains that every year at this season hundreds of Volux attack from the sea, so this force is impossibly small. He desperately asks whether more troops are still on the way. Hans warns that if the creatures break through the water channels, the walls and gates may fail and the monsters must be stopped outside. He concludes that with only 5 fighters it is absolutely impossible. Yurin corrects him and says the number is not 5. He points out that one man is merely a butler sent by the Marquis to monitor him and another is only his personal servant. Peru awkwardly confirms his role as Yurin's butler rather than a combatant. Yurin adds that Eren and Clyde are the only actual knights he has, then reveals what really matters. To Clyde's horror, Yurin declares that Clyde will fight alone, so there is nothing to worry about. Clyde is aghast and cannot imagine how he could possibly handle that alone. Yurin grabs his shoulder, tells him to trust him, and insists Clyde has hidden power. Inwardly, Yurin resolves to awaken Clyde's berserker talent and turn him into a true monster slayer. He asks Hans to bring 2 practice swords. Once they arrive, Yurin orders Clyde and Eren to spar continuously during work hours, alternating bouts with short rests until the monsters appear. Before the sparring starts, he calls Eren aside for a private question. Yurin asks how her normal sparring with Clyde usually goes. Eren answers honestly and without pride. She says she wins easily every time, which tells Yurin Clyde has never been pushed to his limit. He concludes that she has been holding back and asks her to confirm it. Eren admits she never needed to go all out against him before. Yurin orders that from now on she must crush Clyde with her full strength. He goes further, telling her to beat him mercilessly until he feels the painful gap in their skill. Yurin insists this brutality is necessary to draw out Clyde's latent potential and tells her to trust him. Fired up by that faith, Clyde calls Eren Sr. and steels himself to be put through the ordeal. Clyde charges forward with a roar, pouring aura into his heavy sword for another desperate strike. From the wall, the young Grand Duke realizes Clyde has somehow become frighteningly skilled at manipulating aura. Clyde launches himself at Eren, trying to overwhelm her before she can react. Eren meets the rush calmly, reading his approach instead of being pressured by it. At the decisive instant, she catches the timing of his blade perfectly. Clyde is jolted by the realization that his attack has already been answered. Eren remains expressionless, showing she never considered his assault a real threat. She slips past his line and cuts through his openings in one fluid exchange. The pain and shock force a cry from Clyde as her counter lands cleanly. Eren sheathes her sword while Clyde collapses to his knees and admits defeat. The spectators can only stare, stunned by how one-sided the result was. The young Grand Duke feels a chill and fixes on Eren as the source of it. Reviewing her status, he notes that Eren's traits have grown absurdly strong, especially clear mirror still water. He concludes that her speed and ability to read sword paths make this look less like a child facing an adult than the reverse. In the second sparring session, Eren is already striking Clyde's blind spots before he can respond. By the third session, she is disarming and tagging him almost at will. By the ninth session, Clyde still cannot mount a proper offense and is being picked apart from behind. Even the butler remarks that Eren is crushing Clyde so badly he cannot throw a single meaningful jab. As Eren walks away, the young Grand Duke notes that the shock Clyde must be feeling is enormous. Clyde sinks into despair, unable to accept that the gap between them could be this vast. The young Grand Duke stops the training for the day and calls Clyde over. Watching Clyde's shaken face, he wonders whether this humiliation might finally awaken the hidden power he needs. Clyde protests that he never even touched Eren during all those matches, so talk of latent power sounds absurd to him. The young Grand Duke insists that the power is latent precisely because it does not appear easily. He says Clyde's talent is sleeping, not absent, while Clyde remains unconvinced. Pressed for an explanation, the young Grand Duke refuses details and only asks Clyde to trust him for now. Then he coldly orders the sparring to continue, leaving Clyde horrified at the thought. Time passes again, and on the second day Eren is still cutting Clyde down with ease. By the third day, the pattern has not changed and Clyde is still being struck from angles he cannot defend. Later, the young Grand Duke sits in meditation, apparently waiting for the right moment. A guard bursts in and reports that something terrible has happened. The young Grand Duke asks what it is, and the guard blurts out the news in panic. The guard announces that the Volux are climbing up from the sea. They rush to the battlements, where the guard points everyone toward the shoreline. At first only strange shapes can be seen rising above the water. Then the creatures reveal themselves as Volux, ugly fish-like monsters with red eyes and jagged teeth. More and more Volux swarm in, turning the coast into a sudden monster tide. Instead of panicking, the young Grand Duke recognizes them with eerie familiarity, and even calls them cute. He casually asks Eren where Clyde is, making the nearby guard fear this is about to go badly. Eren explains that after losing to her earlier, Clyde is still kneeling on the coast in despair. Hearing that, the young Grand Duke brightens and immediately decides to use the situation. Meanwhile Clyde lies broken on the sand, convinced he is hopeless. Eren reaches him and gets his attention. She presents him with a massive ornate sword from the young Grand Duke, noting how heavy it is. She relays the order that the Volux are coming, and Clyde is to fight them. Clyde can barely believe what he just heard. As the monsters charge, Eren delivers the Grand Duke's cryptic instruction to entrust his body to the smoke. She adds that after giving that message she was told to leave Clyde there and return alone, which shocks him. While running back to the castle, she calls out that if things become dangerous the young master said he would help. Left facing the incoming horde, Clyde can only call the order cruel and incomprehensible. He stares at the castle in disbelief, unable to understand how he has been abandoned like this. From the wall, the others hesitate between calling reinforcements and waiting for the Grand Duke's next move. The young Grand Duke finally acts and gives a single command for the plan to begin now. He reaches out and orders Clyde to inhale the smoke. Power gathers at the Grand Duke's hand as he activates the hidden mechanism behind his scheme. He recalls that the Berserker trait has immense potential but usually stays dormant because of its docile nature. He also remembers that Clyde was in the middle of his natural growth and that forcing it this way is embarrassingly artificial. Still, he knows the seal on Berserker can be broken only by driving its owner to the limit. The first step is to hit that limit and push past it. The next step is to confront an even greater wall and fall into extreme despair, sadness, and fear. When that state is reached, he unleashes soul murder poison. The poison spreads as a hallucinogenic smoke over the battlefield, designed to induce fear and confusion. A red cloud erupts around Clyde and the charging Volux, swallowing the shore. The monsters recoil and shriek as the strange smoke engulfs them too. Inside the haze, Clyde is bewildered by the sudden smoke closing in from all sides. Eren, still nearby, passes on one last message from the eldest young master. That final instruction is simple and brutal: inhale the smoke. Clyde coughs as the poison enters him, and the hallucination begins with a cry for his mother. He sees his childhood self trying to shield his mother from a violent drunken father. The father kicks the boy aside and mocks his helplessness while the child screams in pain. The abuse continues as the father laughs and tells the weak child to get stronger if he can. The boy clutches his head and breaks down under the terror and humiliation. Through tears, he apologizes to his mother and swears he will change. He vows that he will become strong enough to protect her. Adult Clyde recognizes the scene as the buried wound of his own childhood. The old command to get strong echoes through him until it strikes something deep inside. That buried self seems to stand before him, forcing him to confront the weakness he has carried ever since. Even Eren's overwhelming strength now folds into the hallucination as another proof of his inadequacy. In his distorted mind, her contempt becomes absolute, telling him he cannot even graze her collar and will never grow stronger. The vision expands until even the people around him seem to join in condemning him. The young Grand Duke's image apologizes mockingly and claims he misjudged Clyde. That false kindness twists into the cruel verdict that Clyde never had any potential and will stay weak forever. Clyde nearly breaks under the weight of it and starts to deny the lie through tears. Then the hallucination turns his family's desperate hopes into accusations that he was supposed to become strong and protect them. Eren and the Grand Duke's faces merge into jeering tormentors who insist a weakling like him can do nothing and will remain weak for life. Clyde rejects that fate with mounting panic and rage as the poison drives him to the edge. At the instant his sorrow and fear peak, the true berserker awakens together with genuine fury. Back on the wall, the guard asks what kind of smoke the young master just released over the coast. A blinding flare erupts from within the red cloud before anyone can get an answer. The guard is baffled, but the young Grand Duke immediately senses what that flash means. He quietly declares success, satisfied that Clyde's awakening has worked even if the method was artificial. Clyde emerges transformed, gripping the ornate sword as flames surge around him and a growl escapes his throat. The onlookers panic because the knight is acting strangely again, but the Grand Duke remains pleased. He prepares to dispel the poison, expecting the awakened Clyde to stabilize afterward. Before that can happen, a Volok lunges through the smoke toward Clyde. The nearby monsters hesitate, suddenly sensing that the prey before them has become something dangerous. Clyde stands in the center of the flames like a predator, and the Voloks begin to fear him. The young Grand Duke starts to tell Clyde to use his flame spirit sword against them, but Clyde needs no further guidance and moves with murderous certainty to burn the monsters to cinders. He charges straight into the swarm, wreathed in fire and swinging the heavy blade as if it were weightless. A sweeping arc of flame erupts from his sword and tears through multiple Voloks at once. Even the guard cannot believe that Clyde just incinerated 5 of them in a single strike. Clyde draws the sword back with a savage cry, gathering even more heat into the blade. Then he leaps high, carrying the flaming weapon overhead for a finishing blow. He crashes down with another blazing slash that carves through the remaining attackers. The surviving Voloks stare in terror as the firestorm reaches them. One after another, the monsters are split apart and consumed by the flames. Their bodies continue to burst and scatter under the relentless burning cuts. Clyde whirls through the battlefield in a ring of fire, cutting down everything around him. Watching from above, the guard is stunned that Clyde is wiping out the entire horde by himself. The young Grand Duke answers that this is exactly what he expected Clyde to be capable of. By then, most of the Voloks are either dead or fleeing from the burning shoreline. Even so, the young Grand Duke notices a new problem in Clyde's awakened state. Because the awakening was forced, Clyde appears to have lost his reason and is no longer fully himself. The castle wall falls silent as everyone realizes the battle is not truly over. In Clyde's distorted vision, the Grand Duke, the butler, and Aaron all still appear as sinister enemies. He begins advancing toward them, seeing even his allies as targets. The young Grand Duke decides Clyde must be subdued without injuring him, though he knows that will be difficult. Aaron immediately volunteers to handle it, catching the Grand Duke off guard. When he turns, she calmly repeats his name and waits for his answer. He asks whether, after seeing Clyde's current power, she is truly confident she can bring him down unharmed. Aaron replies that whatever the young master changed, Clyde's swordsmanship itself has not improved, so she can subdue him. The young Grand Duke is rattled by how matter-of-fact her confidence is, but he accepts it. Ahead of them, Clyde walks back toward the castle through the fading flames with his sword held upright. He groans in confusion and pain, still trapped between awakening and madness. Aaron steps out to intercept him, planting herself directly in his path. As she draws her sword, she acknowledges the effort he put into defeating the Voloks. Then she tells him plainly that she will subdue him while minimizing the pain. Clyde answers with a furious charge, raising his sword and rushing straight at her. The clash is about to begin as his flaming blade comes up and Aaron prepares to meet it. As a fire-wreathed brute lunges at Aaron, she meets the attack with calm precision instead of retreating. The attacker roars in confidence, expecting his flaming strength to overwhelm her. Aaron answers by unleashing a swirling wind spirit that lifts and traps him inside her control. The onlookers are stunned to realize Aaron can now command a wind spirit, something they never imagined from her. Even the young lord is taken aback that she has become this adept with wind to such an extreme degree. Caught in the current, Clyde can only grit his teeth as the pressure closes around him. Aaron stays composed while the wind tightens, showing complete mastery over the exchange. She drives the compressed gale into him and breaks his offense without letting him regain momentum. Clyde tries to brace with his flaming sword, but the effort only delays the inevitable. Aaron closes the distance through her own wind and slips past his guard before he can react. By the time Clyde notices, she is already behind him and his advantage is gone. She ends the duel with a controlled strike from behind, dropping him cleanly instead of maiming him. As consciousness returns, Clyde can only blurt out in confusion at how suddenly he was beaten. Aaron stands over the fallen Clyde while his sword lies out of reach, the match decisively settled. She emphasizes that she subdued the threat without causing injury, proving both power and restraint. The spectators are left breathless and openly wonder why this supposedly minor candidate is so strong. Once the immediate danger passes, the young lord turns to the guard Captain Hans to question the situation. He points out that the reality does not match the warning they were given about monsters being right at the walls. Hans admits this pattern is unprecedented, since monster appearances here normally escalate in a predictable way. He explains that when they start appearing, they usually keep pouring in without pause for the rest of the day. The young lord immediately shifts from surprise to calculation and asks the butler how performance is judged. The butler, startled by the sudden question, begins to recite the evaluation criteria. He says results depend on how many monsters are defeated and how dangerous those monsters are. He adds that protecting the city walls and minimizing allied casualties also matter heavily. Hearing that, the young lord quickly grasps that a low monster count can be offset by flawless defense. The butler worries that if no more monsters appear, the expedition may not produce enough visible merit. The young lord dismisses the concern, saying one expedition alone will not decide the succession anyway. The butler is impressed that he can stay so calm under uncertain conditions, and notes how much he has changed. Meanwhile, Clyde wakes fully, still dazed and unable to understand why he is on the ground. As he sits up, Aaron dryly notes that he is finally coming back to his senses. Clyde asks Aaron what happened, his memory of the fight broken and incomplete. Aaron tells him he single-handedly brought down the Volux, leaving Clyde shocked at the claim. He stares at his own hands in disbelief, unable to reconcile that feat with what he remembers of himself. Still rubbing the back of his head uneasily, he follows Aaron when she tells him to stop dawdling and go eat. Clyde eagerly agrees and trails after her, still confused but happy to move on. That brief comments when a cry goes up from the wall that a new monster has been spotted. The young lord asks where it is, and the watchers scramble to confirm what they are seeing. Through the viewing device they notice an alarming number of fins in the water, and realize this is no ordinary wave. The threat is identified as Sharkrai, dangerous shark-headed marine monsters whose close combat power rivals elite knights. The young lord reacts with interest rather than fear when he recognizes what kind of monsters they are. Others recoil at his casual wording, but he is already focused on what their appearance means tactically. Hans warns that each individual Sharkrai is at least as strong as a high-ranking knight, making the group a major threat. The butler adds that more than 50 appearing at once has never happened before and would normally require the Marquis family's full army. He urges the young lord to stop treating this as a test and retreat from the location immediately. Instead of retreating, the scene shifts to the advancing Sharkrai as their mass charge confirms the scale of the crisis. Clyde asks Aaron what they should do, alarmed by how much faster these monsters are than the Volux. Aaron studies the formation and silently judges that the two of them alone cannot hold such a tide for long. The young lord, however, calmly concludes that if only Aaron and Clyde defend, the line will indeed be hard to maintain. He therefore decides to intervene personally, leaving Hans and the butler aghast. Leaping onto the wall, he tells them to watch carefully and asks Agnes whether they should use the preparation they made. He calls forth the ink-sealed phoenix, revealing the first step of a plan he had arranged in advance. What appears in his hand is not a beast but a spinning circular blade, puzzling everyone present. Hans demands to know what that strange weapon is, while the young lord remains smugly unbothered. He turns to the butler instead, drawing him into the demonstration without explaining himself yet. The young lord orders the butler to keep his eyes open and count carefully, making clear that the numbers will matter. With a confident smile, he promises the result will be decided almost instantly. He balances the spinning blade on one finger and accelerates it until it screams through the air. The shrill vibration becomes painfully loud, leaving Hans and the butler clutching their heads in confusion. Only after building the sound to its peak does he signal that the real move begins now. He snaps the blade into action, sending the prepared trap into motion. The explanation follows that sharks possess extraordinarily acute hearing, which is usually an advantage. But against the wasp-like shriek produced by the ink construct, that same hearing becomes a crippling weakness. The spinning blade tears across the battlefield as both lure and weapon. The Sharkrai are slowed drastically by the unbearable sound and further constrained by the ink wall effect. Disoriented and dragged into the trap, the Sharkmen lose the speed and coordination that made them so dangerous. Several collapse before even reaching Aaron and Clyde, leaving them momentarily stunned by how quickly the tide changes. The blade then curves back through the air, continuing to circle rather than stopping after one pass. The remaining Sharkrai can only snarl and flinch as the sound keeps harrying them from every side. Because the construct can keep circling its targets relentlessly, the young lord can maintain pressure without exposing himself. Each sweep carves through another cluster, black blood and severed bodies marking the path of the trap. Even those that try to push through are cut down before they can regain their footing. The attack continues to reap them in rapid succession, turning their charge into a slaughter. Any survivors who attempt to break away are intercepted by another pass before they can escape the kill zone. From above, the battlefield becomes a whirl of intersecting arcs that mow through the Sharkrai ranks. By the time the spinning paths settle, the massed wave has been almost completely erased. The young lord laughs in satisfaction because the outcome matches exactly what he predicted. Without even turning around, he asks the butler whether he has been counting properly. The butler, still shaken, reports the tally climbing through the 40s as he writes frantically. Pleased, the young lord prepares to use that count to his advantage. He casually keeps the blade spinning on one finger, showing that the devastating display barely taxed him. He then calls Aaron and Clyde back into the conversation as if assigning a routine exercise. Since only about 6 Sharkrai remain, he tells the two of them to handle the rest as training. Both are startled that he would reduce such monsters to practice targets, but Aaron accepts immediately. Aaron and Clyde ready themselves side by side, determined to finish what he has left them. They charge the survivors and begin cutting them down amid the bodies already strewn across the shore. Afterward, the young lord asks whether this at least improves their performance record a little. The butler hesitates and admits that, to be honest, the evaluation committee may struggle to believe what happened. The young lord is caught off guard that success itself could become a problem. He reassures the butler that there are plenty of eyewitnesses, so the feat cannot simply be dismissed. The butler finally congratulates him, saying that with this many Sharkrai hunted he has clearly become one of the leading contenders. Yet the young lord's attention drifts away before he can enjoy the praise. He senses a new presence, and realizes something far more dangerous is approaching. The aura rushes toward them at terrifying speed, stronger even than in orc warriors. Out at sea, The water suddenly stills for a heartbeat before something immense breaks through. A massive fin erupts from the surf, announcing a creature on an entirely different level. The first glimpse is a huge body marked with royal tattoos and carrying a weapon made from a monstrous spine. Its bladed spine sword rises fully into view, confirming that this is no ordinary shark rai. The creature fixes them with a direct, predatory stare that makes its intent unmistakable. Then the giant shark monster steps onto land, radiating power and authority over the battlefield. Even Aaron and Clyde are dwarfed by its colossal size and realize they have never faced anything like it. The butler recognizes the description from the Rex family archives and pieces together its identity from the tattoos and spine-forged sword. He names it the legendary Shark Rai King, a towering monster able to manipulate aura and driven by murderous hostility. As it keeps staring straight at them, everyone understands that they have become its chosen prey. The young lord immediately orders everyone else to fall back and get as far from him as possible. When one lesser Shark Rai still closes in, he shouts for the others to retreat even farther, prioritizing their survival over his own safety. A sudden realization hits him that the king is already moving before his warning is finished. The Shark Rai King crashes into the fortress wall with a single impact, blasting stone apart and proving the wall cannot protect them. Through the dust, its silhouette looms larger and more menacing than before. Its roar rolls through the rubble as it emerges from the shattered masonry without slowing. The young lord narrowly avoids disaster and grimly notes that the monster can destroy the fortress wall in one blow. He drops to the shore to draw the fight away from the damaged fort and onto open ground. Facing the king head-on, he challenges it to come after him on the shoreline instead of near the others. The king answers instantly, lunging so fast that even he is forced onto the defensive. He tries to re-establish his earlier control with the ink construct, hoping the same method will buy him space. But the spinning blade strikes the king's bone weapon and is stopped rather than slicing through. The deflected blade whips away uselessly, showing that the king's weapon can withstand the trap. Realizing the ink wall has failed, he curses the absurd hardness of the king's bone blade. The Shark Rai King surges upward with overwhelming force, pressing the attack before he can recover. It follows with a brutal close-range strike, using raw power and aura to dominate the exchange. The young lord is jolted by how completely the king has broken the rhythm of his plan. In response, he activates Small Dragon's treasure, summoning a lightning-charged attack to meet the descending king. He commits to a direct shot, firing the technique straight at the monster instead of trying to evade again. The blast lands squarely on the king's face, forcing a momentary reaction. His system identifies the effect as the neurotoxin sea serpent sand spear, confirming the strike carried poison as well as force. For an instant the king's body crackles under the hit, and the young lord hopes the toxin has taken hold. Yet the king simply bites through the attack's momentum and powers forward through the poisoned impact. The young lord realizes with alarm that the poison dispersed almost immediately instead of disabling the target. The Shark Rai King counters at once, smashing into him with aura-charged violence before he can reset. Thrown back, he admits the monster's resistance is so high that the poison barely affects it at all. Refusing to yield, he hardens his resolve and decides the only option left is to test the new weapon against the king. A week earlier, Rayon asked the smith Gironux whether he could forge a strange weapon from Rayon's design. Gironux saw that the sketch was Rayon's own work and immediately realized it was no ordinary blade. He identified the frightening little daggers as Eastern concealed weapons and understood Rayon wanted something specialized. When asked for a deadline, Rayon hesitated because he needed them for the coming deployment. Trying to seem unconcerned only made Gironux more determined, and the smith vowed to finish them before Rayon left. Back in the present, Rayon faced the Shark Rai King on the beach and prepared to test the weapons made for monsters like Envy. He reflected that Agnes, limited to one transformation, could never have imagined what he was about to do. Rayon spread his fingers and revealed concealed daggers hidden across both hands. He invoked the Tang clan's 12 concealed weapons as his answer to the monster's steel-like body. With a confident flourish, he launched the 12 Zodiac daggers in their first real test. The Shark Rai King roared as the attack came at it from all directions. Rayon hurled both hands downward, sending the daggers forward in a coordinated barrage. The monster lunged at him, only to find the blades already curving toward its body. Rayon explained that each concealed weapon carried both straight and curved trajectory traits, making them behave like guided missiles. He counted on their sharpened, violent tips to seek out the smallest vulnerable gaps. His intent was to drive them through seams in the creature's armor and directly into its weak points. The daggers struck home across the Shark Rai King's torso, making even the giant beast flinch. Rayon was thrilled that the blades had actually pierced the monster's hide, but the Shark Rai King immediately tensed and forced its muscles to respond. To Rayon's shock, the monster expelled the embedded daggers from its body. He realized the brute had simply flexed hard enough to pull every blade back out. Rayon cursed the creature's toughness but did not lose focus. Before he could press the advantage, the Shark Rai King seized its massive bone weapon. Rayon saw too late that the monster had already recovered enough to counterattack. Still, he noticed the poisons were slowing it and took heart from that small success. He reminded himself that each of the 12 daggers carried a different poison injected straight into the bloodstream. The Shark Rai King's body began reacting under the combined toxins even as it moved. Rayon judged that unless a target was immune to every poison at once, the daggers should be fatal. The enraged monster rushed him anyway, swinging its bone blade in a brutal charge. Its legs faltered under the poison, and its movement grew visibly unstable. The weakness spread upward as the creature struggled to keep its balance. Soon the Shark-Rai King was hunched over and sweating, glaring at Rayon while barely holding itself up. Watching from the wall, the onlookers could hardly believe such a monster had been brought low. Even so, they reminded themselves that this was still the king of another race and not something to underestimate. Rayon called the monster Agnes, and resolved to end its suffering quickly. He drew Guri and stepped in for the finishing blow. With one clean slash, he cut through the weakened Shark-Rai King's neck. The severed head separated and began to fall away from the body. As Rayon stared, something small drifted out from the corpse instead of simply dropping dead. He froze in confusion, sensing that this was no ordinary aftermath. What emerged was a single bead, and Rayon could only stare at it. The bead suddenly blazed with golden light. A message appeared declaring that he had acquired a fragment of the shattered world. Rayon demanded to know who had spoken, startled by the disembodied announcement. Before he could make sense of it, the world around him vanished into a blank white void. Alone in that empty space, he looked around in alarm and asked where he was. The bead floated beside him as if guiding him deeper into the mystery. Then a violent rupture opened in the white emptiness ahead of him. Rayon saw what looked like a wall split apart by a glowing gap. The crack widened in a burst of light, as if something beyond it were forcing its way through. Another message appeared, telling him he had contributed to the restoration of the world. A second notice followed, saying his aptitude had been analyzed and a reward would be granted. The system completed its selection, and Rayon realized the guiding voice sounded like a woman's. When it announced that it would replay the death approaching him, Rayon shouted in disbelief. The white void dissolved into a dark, mystical forest with Rayon standing alone inside it. He was unsettled by the sudden change and by how unnaturally dense and ancient the forest felt. As he wondered whether any forest could feel this mystical, he sensed another presence nearby. Rayon turned, already dreading what he was about to see. What stood there was another version of himself, dressed differently and facing him. That other Rayon smiled and announced that it had appeared. Rayon looked around in confusion, unable to understand what this double meant. Then both of them looked up as a blazing divine beast descended from above. Rayon recognized the creature as something impossible in this world, a Qilin. He rejected the sight at first because such a beast should not have existed here at all. He remembered sketching mythical beasts for fun in the past, yet never writing one into the novel story. His double calmly proposed summoning a weapon through Agnes to fight a divine beast like that. The answer that appeared in his hand was absurdly mundane at first glance. A very long umbrella. Rayon could only stare, baffled by such a ridiculous weapon choice. Above them, the Qilin gathered a massive sphere of lightning and prepared to unleash it. Rayon realized the divine beast's attack was pure lightning and overwhelmingly destructive. His double remained calm beneath the storm, gripping the umbrella as if he already knew the solution. He opened the umbrella wide and raised it directly toward the descending lightning. Then he drove the umbrella's shaft into the ground like a stake. The lightning crashed into the umbrella and spread harmlessly across its frame instead of striking them. Rayon understood that the shaft acted as a lightning rod, absorbing the current and grounding it into the earth. He was stunned by the ingenuity and realized lightning attacks became useless against such a setup. The double casually adjusted the umbrella's hooked handle, already preparing the next move. Rayon's attention shifted to the familiar throwing dagger, and he began to suspect what would come next. Sure enough, the double summoned one of Rayon's concealed daggers into his hand. He hurled the dagger straight into the Qilin's body with deadly precision. The divine beast cried out in pain, proving even it could be wounded. Rayon and his double watched as the beast staggered under the unexpected hit. Rayon blurted out that the impossible had happened and the divine beast had actually been caught. But the Qilin rose again, bleeding yet far from defeated. Its antlers began to glow as it gathered another terrifying power. A blinding flash erupted, forcing both Rayons to shield their eyes. Rayon cursed as the overwhelming light robbed him of sight. In that instant of blindness, the vision shifted red with danger and pain. The Qilin's antler pierced through the double's body from behind in a fatal strike. Rayon understood that the death being shown to him was impalement by the Qilin's antler. The vision ended with a notice that the playback was complete, and that the eye of the future that shows death had finished. Rayon snapped back to the beach, disoriented by the abrupt return. Seeing the Shark-Rai King's corpse before him, he realized he was back in reality. His attendants rushed over in alarm, calling out to their young master. They asked whether he had been hurt anywhere while hurrying to his side. Rayon quickly insisted he was fine, hiding how shaken he really was. The others marveled at how he had defeated such a terrifying monster, and admired the enormous head as proof. Still unsettled, Rayon quietly asked Peru whether he had disappeared just now. Peru was confused and said Rayon had simply been fighting the Shark-Rai King the whole time. Rayon awkwardly agreed, pretending nothing strange had happened. Peru added that the fighting elsewhere was nearly finished as well. He praised Rayon's eye for talent, saying his chosen knights were remarkably capable. As the cleanup began, Peru urged Rayon to return and rest while he examined the remains. Walking away, Rayon concluded that the vision and white room had been seen by him alone. He decided that foreknowledge of his future death was a bizarre reward, but at least it gave him time to prepare for a future encounter with a Qilin. Yet another question lingered in his mind as he thought back on the experience. He could not stop wondering what that white room and the split in space had really been. For the first time, Rayon seriously doubted whether this world was truly just the novel he had written. After several more days of minor skirmishes, a week passed and the Marquis family assembled again at Hiwa Port. The troops gathered in formation as the evaluation of the campaign was about to begin. The Marquis thanked everyone for returning alive and unharmed. He praised his sons and knights for their efforts in the campaign. Rayon answered modestly, saying the Marquis himself had taken the hardest position. The Marquis laughed that bearing the hardest burden was simply the duty of Marquis Rox. He then reminded them that this campaign was also the first test in selecting his successor, and announced the evaluation would begin immediately. He ordered the results to be read starting with the youngest, Rayon. The clerk began by stating that Rayon had been responsible for the southwestern wall. The report declared that Rayon had defended his section perfectly. It listed the huge number of monsters he had defeated, including thousands of lower ranks and 22 shark rai. The Marquis explained the traditional scoring system, where shark rai were worth 30 points each. Under that method, Rayon's total came to 5,620 points. The Marquis praised Rayon's hard work and moved on to Colin's evaluation. Colin smirked with confidence while Rayon watched him warily. The clerk reported that Colin, like Rayon, had defended his wall perfectly. Colin's tally of defeated monsters was even larger, drawing impressed reactions from those around him. Then came the key figure. Colin had supposedly killed 35 shark rai. That gave Colin a total of 7,354 points, and he basked in the cheers. The Marquis congratulated Rayon for doing well, but noted that Colin had apparently dealt with even more monsters. Colin accepted the praise with false modesty and obvious satisfaction. The Marquis cut off the posturing and called for the final evaluation urines. The clerk prepared to read Urin's results while the others listened. He began by reporting damage on Urin's side, saying part of the wall had been lost. When he clarified that the wall had actually been destroyed, the crowd was stunned. Colin clung to his brother in distress while Rayon coldly thought the fool still had not learned his lesson. The clerk continued with Urin's kill count, starting with large numbers of lower-ranked monsters. As the totals climbed, Colin's confidence started to crack. Then the decisive number was announced. Urin had killed 169 shark rai for 8,230 points. The entire assembly reeled, repeating the impossible figure in disbelief. Colin protested that with so many people present, Urin could never have killed that many on his own. The Marquis and the clerk hesitated, then admitted there was one more detail. Colin smugly assumed this would expose an error and save him. Instead, the clerk added that Urin had also slain one shark rai king. By the family records, that king was worth 10,000 points, raising Urin's total to 18,230. Colin was left speechless, unable to process that a shark rai king even existed. Desperate, he told himself the result had to be a lie. He shouted that the claim was absurd, arguing that killing over 100 shark rai already made no sense. The clerk calmly replied that he had expected disbelief, and would therefore provide proof. At his request, soldiers brought forward a wrapped object taken from the battlefield. They uncovered it enough to reveal the unmistakable shape of a massive severed shark rai head. The monstrous head was hoisted before everyone, and the assembly could only stare in shock at the undeniable proof. The soldiers are stunned to realize the monster before them is truly a shark rai king. Its sheer scale, more than triple that of an ordinary shark rai, leaves the onlookers shaken. A bespectacled witness adds that there is an even more telling detail. He points out the enormous bone blade taken from the beast, astonishing everyone who sees it. The absurdity deepens as they grasp that someone actually wielded that monstrous bone as a weapon. The Marquis confirms the corpse matched old records exactly, from its towering body and tattoos to the bone blade. He insists he remembers those records clearly and is not speaking lightly. To preserve the remains for study, he sent the torso to the Rex family and urges them to verify it there if needed. Yet he quickly reassures his scholar friend that such proof is unnecessary because their long acquaintance has already earned trust. The scholar reminds everyone that the shark rai king broke through the fortress wall in a single leap, implying the danger had been catastrophic. Colin blurts out that without the young master killing it, they would all have been wiped out. The Marquis presses Urin to confirm whether he used the mysterious power he had displayed before. Urin calmly admits that he did. The Marquis praises him lavishly and admits the thought of what might have happened otherwise is terrifying. Urin accepts the praise with an easy smile, saying he only did what was necessary. Beside him, Colin grows visibly uneasy at how smoothly Urin is playing the hero. Urin throws an arm around Colin and calls him out, forcing a pained reaction from his brother. With a mischievous grin, Urin mocks Colin's weak response and leaves him flustered. Colin awkwardly tries to recover and addresses him with strained respect as his brother. Urin suddenly questions why the shark rai king was worth 10,000 points at all, suggesting the reward sounds inflated. When Colin asks what he means, Urin casually proposes reducing it to a single point. He explains that the kill was too easy to deserve more and reminds Colin that their point totals are close enough that he cannot afford to lose ground. Colin stiffens as Urin declares the first test was won far too easily. Urin says he wants the second test to be balanced and entertaining, so Colin should work harder. Even spoken teasingly, Yurin's challenge lands as a serious warning to his brothers. The Marquis cuts in to explain that this expedition was only the first test and was meant mainly to give them experience. He reminds the three heirs that the Rex Lord must wage war against endless monsters every year, and that a Marquis's life is far from comfortable. For all the honor of the title, he says, it carries an equally crushing burden of responsibility. After reflecting on that, he postpones further talk of the test until their return and turns everyone's attention to departure. He orders them to board the ship at once before they miss their chance. The vessel, he explains, is hidden by concealment magic so it can move through nearby seas without drawing marine monsters, and their last task is to survey the area. At the harbor, the impressive ship leaves the younger men staring in awe. Leon excitedly notes that magicians are aboard too, and Yurin answers that a magically powered ship would naturally require them. As Yurin looks over the Sea Dragon Knights, something catches his attention among the crew. He spots a familiar knight named Rekka Alian and sees that the man's murderous intent toward him remains at a deadly negative affinity. Rekka returns a chilling smile that confirms the hostility is very real. Yurin inwardly recoils, finding the man's killing intent almost unbearable to face. Once the ship is underway, the Marquis summons Yurin, Colin, and Leon to him. He begins teaching them the geography of the region, saying the knowledge will help them later. Pointing out a nearby island, he identifies Polian Island and notes that it is home to many Mantar. He continues his lesson with earnest fatherly intensity while the three sons listen in awkward silence. Watching the scene, Yurin cannot help thinking the Marquis truly looks like a father traveling with his sons. Their lesson is interrupted when a white-haired female knight approaches across the deck. She asks Yurin whether he is suffering from seasickness. Yurin turns to her, surprised to be addressed so directly. When she says she is relieved that he is not seasick, the exchange immediately softens. She admits that the moment feels surreal, prompting Yurin to ask what exactly she means. She explains that only months ago she never imagined she would be standing beside him like this. Yurin laughs awkwardly and confesses that back then he was not really himself. Her sudden thanks catches him off guard. She thanks him sincerely for allowing her to become a knight, and begins to speak from the heart. Now, she says, she finally feels she understands what happiness is. Yurin falls silent, taken aback by the depth of her gratitude. He answers gently that if that is true, then he too finds it rewarding. Before the moment can settle, a violent jolt cuts through the ship and shocks him mid-sentence. The impact hurls people across the deck, dropping knights, mages, and the Marquis alike into chaos. As the Marquis scrambles up in alarm, he realizes the ship has collided with something massive. A huge surge erupts beside the vessel, confirming that something has struck from the sea. Yurin and the white-haired knight brace themselves on the deck and look toward the disturbance. Yurin begins to identify the threat, his face tightening as recognition dawns. A gigantic sea serpent rises before them, looming over the ship like a living nightmare. His system identifies it as a rare and savage sea serpent whose venom burns prey alive and whose special power is Dragonia. The serpent spits venom across the deck, and Colin and a nearby knight cry out as the toxic spray hits. More poison splashes over the crew, leaving Leon and one of the mages writhing in pain under the burning venom. The Marquis, already down on the deck, despairs that this disaster has come while all his sons are aboard. Yurin and the white-haired knight struggle amid spreading pools of venom, both trying to understand the sudden poisoning. Then Yurin realizes the toxin is not affecting him because his poison immunity has absorbed the sea serpent's venom, and his 10,000 poisons body scripture has advanced to 5 stars.